What if the Sphinx isn't a pharaoh's boast at all, but a rain-scarred witness from 10,000 years before Egypt, waiting for someone to hear what stone has been trying to say? Stand at dawn beside its silent gaze, and feel a different history stir beneath the sand. Subscribe to Stone Sleepers for midnight archaeology, desert hush, and myths we measure against the stars. Settle back, breathe slow. The story begins now. You arrive after the last buses sigh back toward the city, their red taillights sowing a loose seam through the dusk. The gatehouse lamps blink awake. A guard finishes a cigarette and nods you through. Behind you, Cairo's noise fades like a radio turned gently down. Ahead, the plateau opens, dark and level, and the Sphinx waits in its shallow basin, breathing its quiet into the night. You stand and let your eyes adjust. The air is cooler than the day promised. Dry, steady, honest. Stone keeps its own temperature, and tonight it has let go enough heat to feel like shade that learned how to rest. The Sphinx is darker than you expected, less a portrait than a set of worn planes. You came for drama. You find composure. It weighs more. You move along the fence not to get closer, but to change scale. The city's glow is a low fire at your back. The pyramids balance against the sky like two final notes you can almost hum. Down here, the wind is gentler. It gathers grains and lays them down again, as if practicing a story it will always know. Time settles on your shoulders like that. Light, then present. Listen. Even silence has parts. A moth taps at a floodlight. A chain clinks somewhere out of sight. A stray dog crosses gravel, paws whispering, collar tag ticking its small metronome. Beneath those is something steadier, a hush with weight. The plateau itself. It is the sound a book makes after you close it and set it down. The day's crowds hang for a moment in imagination. Voices, selfies, the bright punctuation of laughter, and then fall out of the air. The plateau becomes a room again. You sit on a ledge and place your palm on limestone. It is not smooth. It remembers tools and seasons, wind's thin handwriting, brief rain reconsidered. The rock is granular, layered like pages. Someone read deeply here. Shadow peels back from edges. The chest and paws are the first to resolve, then the stepped walls of the enclosure, then the squared faces of the temples, where cut blocks still catch light. The Sphinx's mouth is a half sentence. The gaze is not stern or kind, it is directed. Beyond the trench, the temple stones look crisp. They were moved. This was revealed. Breathe in for 4, out for 6. Your shoulders let themselves go lower. Somewhere the day's heat works out of the seams in tiny sighs. Thoughts that were stacked begin to lie down. Stillness here is not empty. It is work you can lean against. The Sphinx keeps watch. Let that be enough. You could pull dates into the open, line up dynasties like beads, measure alignments and error margins. All that will be there in the light. Night is for shapes and quiet certainties. The only certainty you need carries no number. A deliberate intent chose this hill, this horizon, this posture, part lion, part idea, eyes set where dawn will appear. Match your breath to the wind, lid your eyes halfway until edges soften into tone. The Sphinx becomes less an object and more a boundary between rock and meaning, city and desert, told stories, and what stone is ready to say when you are finally quiet. A plane passes far off, its lights blinking a tidy rhythm that the sky swallows without effort. The steady note remains. Trace the enclosure with your eyes. The walls drop in steps, where the cut followed the rock's natural layers. Some faces are sharp, some rounded, some scalloped, as if fingers pressed there for a very long time. Time has more than one handwriting. Wind engraves, water rounds, heat opens, hands carve, none cancels the others. The plateau keeps all the versions. You notice the way the Sphinx sits, not square to you, but square to something larger. In your mind, extend a line from its eyes, straight out into the dark. Let it find the rim of the world. You can feel geometry without solving it. Bodies know alignment. That knowledge loosens the exhale. A cat pads along the fence and stops to consider you like weather. It slips into a shadow too narrow to hold it and vanishes. The surface implies rooms below the way a ceiling implies a floor you cannot see. You sense spaces, because arrangement suggests them. If the Sphinx is a question, the plateau teaches patience enough to keep it. A breeze lifts. Sand ticks along the ground like the softest rain on tin. It doesn't sting. It reminds. Even hard edges soften if asked the same question long enough. You think of your own edges, the deadlines, the names, the argument you carried here out of habit. Let the wind ask them its small, persistent question. Feel them begin, just a little, to answer. There is an hour in every night that feels like confidence shared. You don't earn it. You just have to be present. The Sphinx keeps that hour well. It teaches weight by showing balance. The paws press forward not to threaten, but to distribute. The lifted chest is a held breath without strain. The head carries attention and does not tire. Stillness here is a posture practiced for longer than kingdoms last. Try a small experiment. Hum a low note, softer than a whisper. Not music, just a tone. Feel it in your throat, behind your breastbone. Imagine, for a second, the stone keeps a memory of it, the way a bell keeps the faintest shimmer after being struck. You are not seeking wonder. You are noticing acoustics. Some places favor quiet that holds small sounds. This is one. The guard's radio crackles and quiets. The stars assert themselves. Let Orion come into view when you stop trying so hard to force him. The three-line is simple once you allow it. Consider how many nights someone has looked up from this basin and traced the same shape. The sky answers our attention with regular things. Dawn where dawn should be. Seasons arriving by angle. That is a kind of kindness. Close your eyes for a moment and discover nothing disappears. The Sphinx stays printed on the dark inside your lids. You can still place the trench lip, the temple face, the sleeping dog under the kiosk eave. Memory begins as arrangement before it learns facts. Tonight, you are storing the order of things. If age arrives as a thought, let it pass without gripping. In daylight, numbers will declare themselves. Tonight, age is simpler. Time has had all the time it needs, and this remains. Endurance that asks nothing from you is a relief. The Sphinx does not require your attention to continue. It will keep watch while you sleep. It will keep watch when you go. Fold your hands. Dust gives a little under your weight and sounds like a small sigh. No water moves here, and yet a coolness gathers in the basin as if the air remembers a different season. Do not chase the idea. Let the air lie along your forearms and the back of your neck and call it enough. Belonging can be that modest. The mind drifts in the useful way, not escape, but anchor. Draw again the line from the Sphinx's eyes to the world's edge. Place an offering on it, not a coin, not a flower, just a softened question. What are you is loud. How do you endure fits. Let the night tuck it somewhere beneath the pause. It will be there in the morning. You stay until the dark thins. Night does not brighten so much as it loosens its hold. You stand and brush your palms. The sand leaves politely. Look once more, not for answers, but to confirm that questions can be held safely for a very long time. The gaze does not change. It doesn't need to. You understand. Walk back slowly. Fence, path, gatehouse, the nod from the guard. Let the city's hum re-enter by degrees. Carry the question like a warmed stone in your pocket. It will keep its heat long enough to meet your pillow. You arrived after dusk and were held by a stillness that did its work without asking you to do yours. Now, let your eyelids close the rest of the way. Let the Sphinx keep watch while you sleep. You let the night loosen its hold and the plateau obliges. Edges soften. The city's glow steps back. With the same patience as breath, you drift, not away, but backward, through layers of air and time until the present thins to a veil. The sand underfoot cools. The smell in the dark changes first. Less dust, more leaf, the faint green note of things that drink. Wind arrives with weight in it, carrying distance and rain. Somewhere behind your closed eyes, thunder practices. Open them. The Sahara is not a desert. It is a quilt of lakes, grasslands, and long glistening swales where water lingers. Monsoon clouds gather like slow ships and come ashore with a low, continuous murmur. They tend the land in measured sheets, rain stitching hills to plains, and plains to the remembering sky. Between bursts, the light sharpens. Everything gleams as if newly spoken. Spear-tall grasses, the glossy backs of beetles, the lacquered leaves of acacia and tamarisk. Even stone looks awake. Walk. The plateau is still limestone, but tonight it behaves like a headland above a seasonally green sea. The ground under your shoes is firm, a chalky terrace that drops to a mosaic of wetlands and open water. To the west, shallow lakes hold fleets of reeds. To the east, braided channels scroll across lowlands. Each a sentence water writes in spring, then edits when it returns. On the margins, trickles become rills, become streams that think about being rivers. The air hums. Cicadas, frogs, a chorus of small lives laced together by rain. Look long enough and you see movement everywhere. Wind makes a shoulder-height wave in the grass, and it travels as if the land were breathing. Egrets pick their way along margins, white notes on a green staff. A kingfisher strikes blue fire and vanishes into still water. Farther out, a hippo lifts like a hill, remembering it can move, then settles again with the sort of exhale you can feel in your own ribs. There are antelope in the middle distance, a smudge of motion that becomes bodies when the light tilts. The sky keeps a clean edge along the horizon, laid against the earth like a hand. People belong to this soundscape. Their presence is small and exact. A path runs where feet have voted for years. A hearth, cooled and carefully banked, wears a crown of ash, the color of old bone. Clay bowls dry in the slant shade cast by woven mats. In the shallows, a fence of sticks and reeds narrows into a funnel. A fish trap made from patience and local geometry. On a flat stone, someone has left a line of shells drilled for stringing. Nearby, a child has pressed a hand into damp silt just to witness it exist, and then erased it, laughing. The day accepts the gesture and moves on. You pause on a shoulder of the plateau where the rock's layers read like a book's foredge. Here the wind speaks in two dialects at once, a soft, grass-bent whisper from the plain, and a cleaner mineral tone along the ridge. Bend closer. The limestone remembers water as an idea and a teacher. Thin skins of wet run over it for weeks each year, filling tiny hollows, rounding corners, cutting quiet channels where droplets insist on being the 1,000th, then the 10,000th. This is how stone learns the handwriting of rain, not with drama, but with duration. The sky demonstrates overnight construction. In the last light, a front assembles out of distant blue, and then bears down with purpose, its underbelly dark, its edges feathered. The first drops are exploratory, fat, widely spaced, sounding out the dust. Then the present tenses. Rain finds its confidence and sweeps the page. You can smell limestone waking when water hits it, chalk and shell and the ghost of tide lines. You can hear the hill take a drink, a sound between a note and a thought, low and satisfied. The plateau shines like something just carved. You do not need to force meaning here. It arrives in manageable pieces. See how the rills align themselves, how water chooses certain seams and commits to them. Watch where flow lines find the soft, then the softer, and write the same story in parallel columns down the walls of shallow cuts. Imagine those columns aging into the kind of vertical pattern that reads, centuries later, as memory. Hold that impression and let it pass. This is not a courtroom. It is a classroom, and the teacher is very patient. Life arranges itself around water with the same sense of fitness. In the reed beds, weavers have stitched homes that sway and hold, yellow threads knotted into clean geometry. Where the grass gives way to open mud, you see loops of hoof prints and the slick signatures of bellies and tails. A crocodile, older than dynasties without trying, slides into a channel and becomes a rumor. Insects rehearse an understanding with flowers. Everything knows its job, and the job is to keep being this, here, while the good season lasts. You climb higher and watch weather draw corridors through the air. The monsoon does not rush, it attends. Its voice is a room-filling whisper that reduces thought to the size of breath. Under that voice, people move like punctuation, a pair with baskets balanced, a trio laughing under a hide, a lone figure checking snare lines, staked where a path kisses a copse. They learn by attention. Measure with the hand, the foot, the eye. Rejoice in the repeatable. Distant thunder, the fragrance of drenched dust, the calendar you can feel in your joints. On an overhang, earlier rain has left a darker bloom on the stone, a map of how water preferred to wander. You touch it and your fingertips come away cool. A thin rind of algae finds a living here, a green that is more idea than color, and the stone accepts the company without fuss. When the sun returns, the sheen will dull, but the memory of wet will sit inside the rock like a kept promise. The plateau is keeping many such promises at once, some a season old, some old, in a way that doesn't fit names. Let your breath balance with the cycle you're watching. Gather, release, gather, release. The land inhales when clouds build, exhales when lakes brim, inhales as grass lifts, exhales in seeds. Your own chest copies this without effort. It is hard to be anxious when everything around you is practicing enough. Somewhere to the southwest, on a dry shoulder above a long-lived playa, upright stones throw clean shadows. A circle of them catches and divides light in ways that make their logic feel obvious to the body if not to the tongue. Someone has stood there at sunrise and known when to plant. Someone has watched the first star appear in deliberate relation to an angle of stone and said, "It is time." You do not need to name that place. Its kinship with the way this plateau faces the sun is felt more than said. Back at your overlook, the rain thins to outliers. Droplets find the last low spots and settle. Birds claim the quiet first. Then, frog sound steps back, like an orchestra tidying scores. Steam lifts from dark soil. The air carries a sweetness like cut melon or fresh clay, a kindness growing things make when they are pleased. The lakes lie heavy, mirror pure. If you listen into the stillness, you can hear roots working, minute pullings, a downward patience. Now let a long hour pass in a short paragraph. Seasons turn their pages. The green is not permanent. Its gift is cyclical and skilled. Wet recedes. Color trades saturation for tone. Reed beds brown into scrollwork. Shorelines withdraw like careful guests. Nothing breaks. Everything reassigns. In the shadows of stones, small greens persist, confident in next time. The rock, meanwhile, keeps its new understanding. Softened seams, deepened channels, corners that remember how to be rounded. Wind arrives to sign its name, where water has taught it where to write. Return to the plateau's rim as light lowers across a fresh year. Water is on the move again, polite at first, then fluent. You can see, if you relax your eyes, how this will look to someone standing where you stood in a later century. Vertical scallops where sheets ran, smoothed turns where flow lingered, a choreography that reads as script. You are not deciding anything. You are learning how to read a page whose letters take generations to form. People finish their work for the day and gather in a shallow cup of land that shelters a fire from the minor wind. Stories are traded and edited, tools are mended. Hands move in the inherited economy of making. A pot shows a pattern of wavy lines, a gesture toward water in a place that knows its value. A newborn blinks at firelight and reflexively finds a rhythm, nursing to the same slow drum the clouds kept. Someone laughs, and it lands like a gift. Night arrives cleanly. Frogs resume their practice at a softer volume. A hyena tags the perimeter with the dark convenience of night vision. Stars step forward, bright and untroubled by the humidity that made them shy an hour ago. Somewhere, an elder points and draws a line through 3 bright points over the plain, making a belt for a hunter the land understands. The curve of the river is a new kind of constellation, this one on Earth. You lie back on the limestone, now the temperature of a good idea, and feel how the hill fits your spine. It is not a carved terrace yet, not a guardian, not an argument. It is a place that knows where dawn goes, and has practiced drinking. If a thought about the future arrives, about creatures coaxed from bedrock, or temples built from the stone cut around them, wave it through and let it continue down the path without you. Tonight belongs to what is here, water giving the lesson, and stone taking notes. Breathe the easy arithmetic of this climate. Rain that becomes river, that becomes lake, that becomes cloud. Let your mind write the same equation with different words. Attention that becomes pattern, that becomes meaning, that becomes memory. The plateau is alive with both, and the world you are visiting has time for them. When your eyelids grow heavy, let them lower. The monsoon is still speaking, and the limestone is listening, and between the two, a language is forming that needs no alphabet. In it, the land says simply, before the desert, I learned how to hold water, and how to let it go. You will hear the echo of that lesson in the morning. Step down into the basin, and the air changes. Sound gathers, then thins. The city is a rumor now, the plateau, a quiet room, and the walls of the enclosure rise around you like pages lifted by a slow hand. Morning light comes from an angle that knows what it's doing. It leans across the limestone and makes the features honest. Lines that hit at noon present themselves. Textures step forward. You put your palm to the stone and feel a cool that doesn't belong to the sun. It belongs to time. Look closely. What at a distance reads as stain or shadow resolves into grooves. Narrow, vertical channels that run from ledge to ledge, some straight as a pulled thread, others wavering where layers change their mind. Between them, the corners don't knife outward. They melt. Edges arrive as softly as breath around a syllable. The wall doesn't announce itself with sharpness. It remembers with rounding. This is the place where water learned to write on rock, and the script it favored runs down. Wind has a handwriting you recognize once you've seen it a few times. Cross-hatching, rasp, a sideways polish where grains have raced past for centuries. But the walls here keep a different archive. The signatures are vertical, patient, organized by gravity rather than gust. Each fluted runnel is a sentence begun during a fall, and resumed during another, and another, until the stone accepts the argument and keeps it. It is the soft handwriting of long, sustained rainfall, whispering with every line it kept, older, older. Pick one channel with your eyes and follow it. See how it begins wide, where a ledge once collected water and narrows as it descends, as if the idea becomes more focused as it goes. In wet years it would have been a sheet at first, rain draped over the wall like a curtain, then a set of beaded strings, then a single clear thread finding the easiest path. That path has become habit. Stone, like people, remembers what it repeats. The groove is memory, made visible. Where two channels meet, the corner between them is not a sharp angle, but a softened hinge. You can press the pad of your finger into it and feel that nothing interrupts the curve. That is Rain's other lesson. It is as skilled at rounding as it is at cutting. A corner is where a decision is demanded. Water declines to decide. It arrives, it rests, it leaves, and the insistence of that cycle turns edges into agreements. The whole enclosure looks composed by that logic. Facets become planes, planes become arcs, and arcs become a kind of grammar for runoff. Move your eye along the wall and notice the ledges that interrupt the downward stride. Some layers project, harder beds shouldering out, then give way to softer seams that recess and cup small shadows. Water favors these differences. In the hard bands, channels are faint, as if the pen skipped. In the softer they deepen and widen, scalloped in places where rivulets braided and unbraided. A ledge becomes a shelf, becomes a shallow basin, where droplets gather their case before proceeding. Gravity keeps the vertical order. Geology supplies the punctuation. Kneel. At your height now are tiny alcoves the size of a cupped palm. Solution pockets where standing water work the same place beyond a single storm. Every pocket is a promise kept by repetition. You could almost hear their arithmetic. One rain plus another equals absence shaped like a bowl. Around them the skin of limestone is pitted in a tight pattern, like an orange whose shine has been weathered away. Salt once grew like frost here after a wet spell, and then left, its crystals pulling grains as they went. Even the smallest textures point to a history of wetness that wasn't a surprise visit, but a season. Stand again and let your gaze widen to include the body of the Sphinx and the neighboring temples in the same frame. The contrast is a kind of instruction. The temples, squared blocks cut from this very trench, wear their age differently. Their faces are angular. Their joints assert themselves in clean lines. The blocks show abrasion and chip, and the long effects of heat and dust, but not the soft, downward fluting that the enclosure walls keep like a scar. If wind wrote all of this, it would have been an impartial author. But one set of pages reads vertically, the other does not. You are not handing down a verdict. You're noticing a difference, and differences are teachers. Walk a few paces and find a corner where two walls meet. The meeting is not crisp. It is a negotiated rounding that continues in the floor. The floor itself is not flat as a poured surface would be. It is quietly shaped, a shallow dish with a sense of where water once liked to stand. In a storm season, this basin would have been a listener. Rain falls, gathers, speaks downward, and then pauses to think before slipping through cracks and away. Put your weight on your heels and imagine the sound of that pause, the hush of water held. There is a temptation to make this a trial, wind on one side, water on the other, each calling expert witnesses. Instead, spend a few minutes reading. Trace with your eye the place where the groove deepens under a drip line that still exists as a lip. Note the rounded return at the base where flow met floor, stalled, and turned its force sideways. Watch the way the uppermost ledges bear shallow runnels that end abruptly, where older repairs patched them. Everywhere you look, gravity has laid a straight edge, and water has taken dictation along it. Let your breath take the same path, downward, then easy. In through your nose for 4. Out for 6. As you settle, the wall's details become less urgent and more legible. A long, even scallop repeats every hand's width. A pair of channels merge, lose identity for a while, then separate like old friends walking the same street. In a higher band, the grooves are faint but continuous, as if the stone resisted but yielded a fraction each year. This is the math the sky practices. A little added to a little, until the sum announces itself in a curve your fingers can find without looking. The mind will reach for dates. You can let it. You can also let the wall answer in its own measure. Wind is impatient. It devours sharpness and leaves record as rasp. Water is patient. It makes pathways and rounds interruptions. And when it is given centuries instead of seasons, it leaves this, the soft descent written over and over. Whisper it with the wall if you like. Older, older. And hear that no one is making a proclamation. It is simply the way the grooves point, the little rivers of stone flowing down to the basin's quiet. Turn your face to the Sphinx again, and hold both truths, the body carved from the hill, the blocks raised to frame it. The enclosure keeps the rain's signature. The temples keep the masons. Between them, a sequence suggests itself. Something was here to be surrounded. Something was already old enough to have met seasons with its skin before the squared stones ever stood. Sleep welcomes suggestion. Argument can wait for daylight. Run your fingers lightly across one of the channels. It is not deep in the dramatic way a canyon is deep. It is deep in the way practice is deep. The groove worn by a hand on a threshold over generations. A single storm writes in water. 10,000 write in stone. The channel is a ledger. The rounded corner is interest accrued. Step back to where the light gives you both glare and shadow at once. Relief sharpens. The fluting stands proud not as cuts but as the absence around them. If you squint, you can imagine the wall under rain, thin sheets breaking into ropes that braid and unbraid as they fall. No photograph can deliver that motion back, but the limestone hints and your mind supplies the rest. It is not extravagant to see it. It is faithful. Breathe once more with the basin's shape. In, down, gather, out. Then let your eyes climb to the rim and beyond, to the line where the plateau meets the sky. Out there, the wind is doing its work on the open faces, writing its crosswise script. In here, the enclosure keeps its vertical page. Between the two handwritings is the story you came to read, not to finish, not to close, simply to rest your finger on the line and whisper the word you found there. Older. And then again, quieter, as the stone agrees. Older. Morning lays a careful hand on the lion's body and asks the stone to be specific. Edges wake first, the ridge along the shoulder, the fold at the base of the neck, the neat geometry where paws extend and settle their weight. You step closer, expecting what Egypt usually offers in return for attention: names. The place where a builder says, "I was here," and a king says, "I remain." You look for an oval frame with a royal name nested inside. Cartouche as seal, as vow, as map back to the owner's soul. The Sphinx offers none. You run your eyes along every surface that could have hosted a claim: the chest, broad and attentive, the leading edge of the forepaws, the sides where workers carved down into the bedrock and left clean faces that would have taken a chisel well, the curve beneath the jaw where a craftsman might have tucked a discreet signature. There is nothing, not a line of hieroglyphs marching in proud balance, not a falcon, not a reed leaf, not a tethering rope binding sounds to eternity. Only the textures of making and of weather, the dialogue of tool and time. Egyptian stone usually speaks in two voices at once: image and inscription. A statue wears its owner's face, but also his names, multiplied and hedged against loss. Horus name, throne name, birth name, each a key that can reopen the door to memory. Temples carve hymns into their walls so the recitation can survive the priest. Even small jars will carry a line or two to remind the future who they served. The Sphinx refuses this grammar. If a king claimed it, the claim is not here. Silence feels less like absence than decision. You walk the length of the left flank and find only the history of contact, the clean geometry where an ancient repair inset fresh stone, the long arcs where centuries of wind softened what chisels could not, the tiny pitting where salt once grew after rains and then left, pulling grains with it. Work and weather have left their notes, only names are missing. You kneel to read the base course of rock for any shallow scratching. A mason's guideline, a dedication, a later visitor's hurried boast. The limestone answers with nothing but its own sedimented story. Shells turned to powder, turned to stone, page turned to page, until it became a body. The head lifts from the great shoulders with a composure that makes explanations feel excitable. The Neem's headdress steps back from the face in slow pleats. The cobra that once rose at the brow is broken away. The chin that may have carried a false beard now carries only the memory of weight. The nose is gone, and with it, the temptation to judge an expression by what scholars call character. The eyes have been pared and pared again by all the gentlest means: wind, grit, light, until they keep only direction. You follow their line east. There is a particular kind of east here, not compass abstract, but horizon actual, the line where color first begins. On certain mornings, those on the equinox when day and night take equal shares, the sun lifts exactly where the gaze has been waiting. You do not need a diagram today. You can feel the readiness in the posture, the patient calibration of head to shoulders to paws to floor of the enclosure. The Sphinx faces the last dark in such a way that it will always welcome the first light, a habit so consistent it becomes the monument's only declaration. In a land of text, this is its sentence. It speaks in alignment. You circle to the right and let your fingertips hover just above the stone without touching. There is a tenderness in not placing your hand. The body is the hill made into an intention. Your restraint feels like a way of saying so. On the far side, you pause at the line where the quarried wall meets the carved shoulder. A boundary like that is where an artist might leave a mark to claim the leap from geology to figure. Again, nothing. The lion is all verb: reveal, align, regard. No signature leans in to collect praise. Between the pause stands a space that invites a slab, a place for a later voice to articulate devotion or debt. In some eras it has been filled. Whatever those stones say belongs to a time after the body. The Sphinx itself keeps its counsel. Even the temples beside it, the low, massive constructions raised from the stone cut out of this very trench, resist the usual urge to talk. Their blocks are too big to need flattery. They wear the tight joints and huge courses of a craft confident in its own logic. If they named their patron, the name has not survived on their faces. The quiet feels coordinated. There are practical stories that might explain the muteness. Stone too weather-soft for fine carving in the open air. Inscriptions once painted instead of cut and long gone to sun and sand. Restorations that chose not to add words where none had been. All are possible. But as you stand below the level of the chest and let your breath settle into the rhythm of the place, the quiet takes on its own authority. Egypt often speaks to eternity in writing. Here, eternity is addressed differently, with posture held beyond dynasties, with a gaze that stays where dawn will be whether worship comes or goes. Think of what names are for. They fix a person in the record. They call a spirit back when recited. They mark possession. They multiply a life by making it legible to time. To write your name on stone is to say, I belong here, and this belongs to me. To decline your name is to choose a different belonging. The Sphinx belongs to the horizon. Its owner, if it has one, is the east. This is not metaphor. If you stand where the pupils point and feel the body's long attention becoming your own, you shift your vantage and discover something odd. The longer you search for an inscribed identity, the more the sculpted identity asserts itself. The lion's front weighs forward to accept the load of looking. The chest is a held breath. The head is a degree of tilt that reads as exact, without resorting to mathematics. The shoulders widen into a kind of sentence end, full stop, and yet not final. You realize you would recognize this being again without a name. The shape is the name. The function signs the work. If you are tempted to paste a king's face onto the outline, as many have, you may. The stone will not object. Faces have been borrowed for less. But when you do, you feel a mismatch between a ruler's need to be remembered and this figure's preference for remembering. Pharaohs build portfolios in stone, scenes of offerings, lists of epithets, narratives of conquest. The Sphinx keeps a single act and performs it without audience if one does not arrive. If it is propaganda for the sky. Walk forward until the paws bracket your view, and the head rides above you like the first phrase of a chant. From here, the sheer economy of the thing presses its case. No scene crowds the surface, no rows of captives, no clockwork lists of gnomes bringing tribute. Even damage is ascetic, breakage in simple pieces, losses that reduce detail without injuring intention. The silhouette is intact. The purpose is intact. The day emerges on cue. Not every monument can say as much after so much time. Your eyes drift down to the base again, to the places where ancient repairs filled losses with blocks and plaster. You search those join lines for worker marks, a crew sign, a count, a quick sketch scratched at lunch. The stone keeps its poise. Either the men who labored here were instructed to leave nothing of themselves, where the years have thinned their presence into the same impersonal surface the body prefers. You do not feel cheated, you feel included in a different collaboration, stone and light and intention, sharing a task. There is a humility to this kind of work that does not announce itself as humility. It is simply the refusal to clutter and act with explanation. The more you look for a name, the more you understand the choice not to offer one. Names argue. This does not argue. It looks. And by looking, it instructs. The lesson is simple enough to be a lullaby. Attend, attend, attend. You let your gaze travel one last time, from the curve of the shoulder to the brow, and then forward along the invisible line that stitches the face to the horizon. You stop insisting on biography and give the monument what it wants, company in its first task. The sun begins to write a thin letter on the edge of the world. The Sphinx reads it without moving. You stand beside a reader older than kingdoms and learn how to listen without speaking. When you leave the basin and climb back to the level ground, you glance over your shoulder out of habit, as if to wave to a host. No name rises to meet the gesture. Instead, the posture answers, and the dawn answers, and that is enough. The lion keeps its silence, the gaze keeps its appointment, the sun keeps its promise. In a place famous for words that outlast breath, here the signature is alignment, and the secret is that it never needed a name to endure. The slab sits where the light can find it without glare. Leaning a little, shouldered by two quieter stones, its top edge chipped into a coastline of small accidents. You don't rush it. Stelae prefer patience. Their messages were carved for eyes that would arrive late, and yours have. You step into the same shade everyone else has used, and let the surface come forward. Limestone with a cream the sun has toasted. A field of signs, cut in crisp, shallow relief, and then softened by a long procession of afternoons. You know the alphabet well enough to see sound in it. Owls with tucked heads, loaves of bread rounded by a careful hand, reeds, water lines, the good, square body of a house, a falcon that will not be mistaken for any other bird. The lines are not crowded. Whoever commissioned this thought the future deserved room. Where phrases are broken by loss, your mind offers ash to fill them, not meaning, only the human wish to make things whole. A hairline crack runs through the lower third, surviving wars and restorations, with the courtesy of not splitting lines apart. Read aloud if you like, or only with your breath. The voice that rises is not triumphant. It is domestic and reverent, a careful register reserved for speaking to gods and to time. It talks of sand first, as if to remove it again by naming it. Sand as hindrance, as silence, as a kind of sleep that got too deep. It describes men with baskets and ropes, feet set wide, moving in a rhythm older than writing. It mentions hands blistering and then toughening, the way muscles find a job and become equal to it. It does not say, I built, it says, we cleared. A verb appears and reappears, to tend, not to conquer, not to raise up, not to claim. To tend is to accept a duty that existed before you arrived. The stela places that duty in a landscape the way a bowl sits in a table's shallow burnish, naturally, by long contact. Shrines, it says. Offerings, it says. Paths restored. Walls rebuilt where walls had forgotten themselves. The phrasing is exact and humble. We mended where the stones remembered their shape, and offered our hands to help them remember it again. There is a name for a goddess here, carved with the old courtesy. The hands uplifted in praise, the throne sign, the mother's crown. She is mistress in one line, beloved in another, a caretaker's caretaker. Her temple is mentioned not as a new idea, but as a house reopened, swept, given fresh vessels, given shade. The verbs keep their softness. We made, we set, we placed. No one is praised for genius. The stela has the calm of laundry hung in order, and a floor washed until it is cool to the feet. It speaks the language of maintenance, and in that language there is devotion. You imagine how the scene at the Sphinx would have looked on the day that voice was first true. The basin full of day laborers and priests, the particular sound of baskets emptied, sand hitting sand, and then the lower note of stone exposed and exhaling. Men in linen, dust drawing diagrams on their shins. Boys sent for water, returning smiling, spilling and forgiven. A foreman marking progress with a stick on a split reed. A jackal slipping along the trench lip, uninterested, knowing work and worship are both normal. The stela's middle registers this movement without trying to make poetry of it. It accounts for what was brought back into alignment, the altar swept, the approach repaved in clean blocks, the spots for incense refitted with new basins. It records offerings like a steward notes stores: bread, beer, geese, a little oil, enough to keep a god from being a poor host. The verbs are in the perfect tense that stelae love. It is done, and thus will be remembered as done. There is a tenderness in the way loss is handled. Here a line ends in a break and resumes a measure later as if nothing happened. Here a hieroglyph has worn down until it is more suggestion than sign, and the neighboring signs lean into their meaning to help it stand. You find yourself mirroring the courtesy, filling the missing word with breath rather than assumption, letting the sense bridge itself. The voice lowers when it reaches the heart of the thing, not construction but discovery. We found. In a culture so good at boasting, the simplicity lands like a blessing. We found this buried. We found that forgotten. We found the face not sleeping but patient. The sentence describing the first clear dawn after the clearing is the most matter-of-fact and the most moving. The light returned and was received. No metaphor, no fanfare, a duty restored to habit. You step back and consider the absence as much as the presence. There is no list of titles for the man who ordered this. If a king's name entered here, and perhaps it did, the stone has made it less important than the verbs. A personal boast would be easy. I made, I restored, I commanded. Instead, it is a we. It is a household. The stela has been written in the grammar of caretakers, who know the god will outlast the donor and the stone will outlast the story of the day. Let your body answer the lesson. You place your palm flat against the lower margin where the stone is uncarved and cool. Beneath your hand you feel two kinds of time: the quick, round pulse of your own, and the flat grazing time of limestone, which thinks in terms of seasons and tools and the long walk of weather. The humility of maintenance is to put those pulses in conversation until they agree on a tempo. That agreement is what the stela celebrates. Not triumph, a word with a short half-life, but continuity. Imagine the ritual this slab inaugurates, a small procession each season or each week. Baskets of bread that smell like something a mother would have brought from an oven. Beer brewed in the polite bitterness of old recipes. In the early light, attendants sweep sand from the threshold, like brushing crumbs from a friend's lap. They pour oil, and it makes a shape on stone that will darken and then fade, and they know it will be needed again, and this does not frustrate them. The god is kept as one keeps a garden, a little at a time, with the understanding that nothing good is ever fully finished. The stela's lower register carries small scenes in which this ethos is staged. Hands presenting offerings, a priest's fingers in the act of pouring, the reed mat rolled and unrolled, a jar stopper being cut loose with a practiced twist. The figures are not individualized. No portrait is needed. This is the point. The work is the face of it, not the worker. The names that do appear are the names of offices, not of egos. The one who opens the way, the one who speaks for the hour, the one who keeps the measures. It is a litany of roles that exist to serve something older. Your eyes slide to the scar that runs across the scene, the crack that learned how to thread between signs without ruining grammar. Even damage seems to have obeyed the ceremony. You smile at the thought and let your shoulders loosen. The slab has carried its message across fractures more life has given it. The message remains. When you find a thing honorable and burdened, you pick up a corner and lift with the others. You do not repaint your name across its face. You clean the lintel. You replace the vessel. You leave space for breath. A breeze moves through the shade, bringing with it the chalk-cool smell of stone and the paper-dry scent of old offerings, the ghost of beer and gum and rush. Somewhere nearby, a caretaker of this century sweeps, broom bristles talking with dust in the language of every broom in every century. The sound becomes a hinge, turning your thoughts from then to now without a click. There is comfort in duties that repeat. You read the last lines and find them as modest as the first. Blessings are asked not for glory but for good order. May the pathways remain open. May the sand be kept at the measure. May the hands know their tasks. May the God be pleased by what is fitting. You let the wish settle the way a bird settles. 2 easy adjustments, and done. The slab doesn't argue with anyone. It just invites you to join a work already underway. When you step out of the shade and back toward the basin, the Sphinx is where you left it, which is the great secret of guardians. Their constancy is theirs, not yours, and you are allowed to borrow it. You carry the stela's verbs with you: clear, rebuild, tend, as if they were small, smooth stones ready for your own pockets. You will not raise a monument today. You will sweep a threshold or two. You will set a thing back to rights. You will ask the light to be received and help it find a surface clean enough to accept it. Behind you, the slab remains in its shade, comfortable with its chips, unhurried by its crack, unbothered by how many readers come to it, hoping to find a builder and finding instead instructions for being a good ancestor. There is a greatness in that substitution. Not every legacy is a sky-piercing block upon block. Some are a broom leaning where a broom is needed, a jar of oil with a stopper loose enough not to fight you, a path kept clear so that when the sun returns, as it always does, the way to meet it is unforgotten. The story comes as stories like to arrive on the plateau, soft-footed, certain of its route, content to be told again. You hear it first in the hush under the lion's chest, then in the narrow shade between the paws where wind collects and rests. A prince rides out from the river with a small convoy, the day already warm enough to thin thought. He hunts, because that is what princes do when the court grows heavy, and the tutors have said enough names. The animals keep their own counsel. The heat writes its long, unblinking sentence. The prince wearies of both. The shadow beneath the great stone head offers what all shadows offer at noon: relief without instruction. He dismounts and leaves the reins to a boy. He pulls free the gold from his collar and the dust from his sandals and lies down where the sand is no longer moving. The paws rise like walls on either side, a shelter big enough for an oath. The face above him is not a face so much as a direction. It does not argue. It waits. Sleep comes quickly when a life has been spent in named rooms. The smallest breeze arranges the grains along his sleeve. The sound from the road thins. The stone holds the cool it learned at dawn, and in that cool a voice finds its breath, not loud, not grand, only certain in the way water is certain when it has a fall to follow. Horameket, the horizon god. Some say the lion speaks his own name first so the boy will know to listen. Others say the name rides in on the wind, the way distant water rides on scent. Either way, the voice is patient, used to addressing mornings, not men. It is sand-gritted, dry with long neglect, and this is what it asks: clear my throat. There are other sentences, of course, divine titles, old courtesies, the way gods remind even princes to stand up straight. But the heart of the dream is simple. The god is not dead. He is buried. The sand does what sand does when allowed. It climbs. It finds a mouth and says, "Let me live here." The boy has come on an ordinary day and laid his head where an extraordinary request could reach it. "If you will clear me," the voice says, "I will clear you. Your path that has not looked like a path will become one." The bargain is shaped to fit a reluctant heir. The prince is not first in the line his father keeps. The court has measured his shoulder and his silence and found both serviceable but not necessary. The dream does not promise inventions, palaces no one has sketched, victories no one has trained for. It offers a maintenance task and a consequence. "Remember me," says the buried god, "and I will remember you." The sleeping body turns, the way a body turns when it hears something true. The breath deepens, the spine listens. Even asleep, the boy measures what the day has asked of him and what the voice is now asking. To invent a kingdom would cost a genius. To remember a god costs labor and a willingness to be seen doing it. The second is the kind of courage he can imagine. He accepts in the manner dreams allow, without words and entirely. He wakes with grit at the corners of his mouth and the taste of stone at the back of his throat. The light has moved, the shadow has edged away. The boy with the reins smiles the polite smile of someone who has learned to stand in shade when he can. The prince says nothing for a span the length of a held breath. Then he does what people who have been addressed by need often do. He begins to organize. In the version told by the stonemason, the ladders arrive on the second day. In the version told by the priest, the incense arrives first. In the version told by the old woman who sells water near the causeway, the boys arrive first, because boys always do, and they arrive laughing. You believe all of them because all of them sound like morning. In each telling, baskets multiply, ropes are spliced, hands find the measure of their work. Sand that was a flat idea becomes a series of heaps with edges. A rhythm establishes itself: lift, step, tip, return. The god breathes a little, and then a little more. The voice of that day will be kept, later, in stone. Between the pause, a slab of red granite will be set upright, and the words carved at a height made for standing and remembering. The top will go missing someday. The part where gods introduce themselves is always the first to break in any story, but the middle will keep what matters. A prince who slept, a god who asked, a promise given and taken into the world. When you stand there and read, you hear the same tone that rose in the shade. Not triumph, not strategy, but caretaking turned to covenant. He is reluctant as heirs go which is to say he does not begin by styling himself inevitable. He begins with a broom. The men who keep track of offerings begin to keep track of brooms. The ones who measure stone begin to measure absence. How much lighter does the god look by late afternoon? How much clearer is the line of the jaw? Children count the steps up and down and up again, and know without being told that they are counting toward a morning they want to see. There are signs that ceremony learns quickly. A shallow table appears at the edge of the trench where bread can be cut and salt scattered and beer poured. It is not a triumph table. It is a breakfast table for a god just woken, a small civility between tasks. Someone drapes cloth where the wind will not steal it. Someone sets a jar of oil in shade and loosens the stopper so nothing fights the hand when the god's brow is ready to be anointed. These are not innovations. They are kindnesses. The prince proves good at this kind of leadership. He is exact without being cruel. He understands how to own a task and not own the men doing it. He gives the work back to the place it belongs. When a foreman comes to report a stubborn section, where sand slides back faster than hands can move it, the prince does not invent a machine. He walks to the problem and stands where the slope is wrong and says, "Here," and the briefness of the instruction is what makes change travel. As the throat clears, something else clears with it. The court's conversation turns and begins to call him likely. His father watches with a king's mixed gaze, pride, calculation, the inevitable subtraction no father admits. Brothers watch with the different arithmetic of birth order. The prince tries not to watch any of it. He watches the pause, the drift, the way the east looks now that the face can fully look back. He finds he prefers the company of a large need to the company of small ambitions. On the morning when the breeze at last runs through the basin without catching, the workers stand back because they know what a clear line is, and they have made one. The prince places both hands on the stone the way a man places both hands on the shoulders of a friend he has woken from fever. There are words, but they are not shouted. Blessings are always louder in their consequences than in their sounds. The day tastes different. The horizon answers more quickly. Somewhere in the city, a door that had not been opened for him opens itself. The stelae will say as much as stone can say without bragging. It will keep the verb small. We cleared. We restored. We set in order. It will display the god's gratitude in the spare grammar of relief. It will mention the prince's titles carefully, and not too early. When later readers arrive, some will call it propaganda. Some will call it faith. Standing between the pause where the breeze moves as a proof in the mouth of a theory, you find it easiest to call it a record of a bargain kept on both sides. From then on, the prince is never entirely done with sand. He orders repairs when wind has proven itself faithful to its own work. He learns to measure a year by how far the drift has walked and how quickly men have walked it back. He sanctifies maintenance, which is a harder ritual to love than building. When, at last, the crown chooses his brow because kingship likes a head that keeps its promises, he wears it as a reminder of a noon when he wore dust. The lesson the dream carried is not complicated enough to comfort courtiers. It does not promise that invention will be rewarded as invention. It says something quieter and truer. Remembrance will be rewarded as remembrance. Care is a royal verb when the object of care is older than the palace. The prince, now king, asks his scribes to keep that grammar even on days when victory drums are easier to hear. You sit again in the narrow shade where he lay down, and you notice that the place still holds sleep well. The stone keeps a cool underlayer for anyone who brings a day heavy enough to need it. You listen for a voice and hear only wind, which is all right. Messages do not multiply to prove themselves. The gift of the dream is ongoing. Each morning the god's throat is cleared, the promise is renewed. I will face the light if you will give me air. You can help with that. You do not need a crown to carry a broom. The story ends the way good stories do here, not with a fanfare, but with an appointment kept. The sun returns. The gaze is ready. A man who had not expected to rise rises because he was asked to remember, and did. The stone, undecorated by boast, records the exchange in verbs any household knows. You breathe, and the place breathes with you, and the old truth arranges itself where you can reach it. Some thrones are set on foundations that were already waiting. Some crowns are earned by letting older things breathe again. You leave the basin by the same worn path the workman must have used, and turn toward the low, blocky shapes that keep the Sphinx for company. The air changes again. The openness of the trench gives way to a closeness made by walls that know how to make shade. A swallow cuts the right angle, explores its echo, and is satisfied. You reach out without thinking and let your fingertips skim a face of stone. It is startlingly crisp. The edge takes light like a blade. Here the blocks sit in ranks, tall as a man and longer, lifted and laid until their joints forgot they were joints. The arises, those knife-thin lines where planes meet, still hold their posture. You can lay a fingernail along them and feel the discipline. No vertical fluting wanders down these faces. No soft, rain-written script has asked for patience. Instead, a dry grammar, course upon course, lintel over jamb, socket meeting tenon with the kind of fit that makes a joint not a guess, but a decision. You lean your weight into one block and feel how it answers with all its neighbors at once. The wall holds you as a choir holds a note. In the pale stone you can still read the sea, faint ghosts of shells, a ripple here and there like a wavelet frozen mid-breath. The maker left the limestone's biography intact and asked it to do new work, to stand, to bear, to square a space for walking and for vows. You follow the line of a joint and find the subtle swallowtail of a clamp bed, the shy little shelf where a copper dogbone once married two stones. Even the problem-solving is tidy. Step to the threshold and let the temperature fall. The floor takes the sun and returns it as calm. Above you, a beam that would have been a sky if it were wood spans the room and turns weight into order. Your footfall finds a beat. Temples like this teach walking again. The body shortens its stride and lifts its heel with care, not because anyone told it to, but because the right angles invite it. In the corners, shadows stack themselves like folded cloth. The smell is limestone's cool and something darker. Granite somewhere nearby, red and grave, bringing its iron memory from far upriver. They took these stones from the Sphinx's trench, lifted them from the hill's ribs as they revealed the lion's body, and built houses for habit out of the same bone. Stone borrowed from stone. You press your palm against a block and try to hear the origin still humming inside the new job. Perhaps it is only the heat sinking, but it feels like a kept connection. The trench walls kept the rain's handwriting. These faces kept the masons. Between the two, a sequence announces itself without raising its voice. The work that frames is after, not first. Kneel, and your eyes meet the level where tool marks live. The strokes run true and parallel, shallow and regular, a planing more than a gouge. The mason moved his arm like a metronome, until the surface declared itself finished and then stopped exactly there. Where a corner has been repaired, the seam reads like a margin note. Here the later hand repeated the earlier cadence out of respect. Your fingertips can tell the old from the new by touch alone. A slightly harder gloss on the replacement, a breath softer on the original, but both belong to the same sentence. You step into the inner room and find the space already knows your breath. It shortens it without hurry, asks it to turn around at the ribs and come back slower. The geometry is simple enough that a child could sketch it, and complicated enough that a life could be spent noticing it. Two piers hold a beam. A passage admits, then refuses, then admits again. Light, paired to a polite seam, runs along a wall for a few feet, and then decides that is enough for today. The proportions are exact, in the way water is exact, when it chooses the lowest course without looking proud about it. Outside the door you run your fingers along a margin where the matting of scaffolds must have once scuffed. The limestone is uninscribed. No cartouches marching, no hymns rehearsing themselves in raised relief. And that quiet rings differently here than it does on the lion's body. On the Sphinx, silence feels like intent. Here, it feels like a good memory kept neatly folded. The work did not need to say its own name. It knew whom it served. The blocks were borrowed from a question and used to build an answer. Shelter, path, place to do the things. Walk the perimeter and notice how the walls tell you where to be by being where they are. A bench course wraps the room. You sit because the stone suggests it, and sitting proves correct. A shallow recess offers a place for a jar, not an abstract jar, but the jar with a stopper you loosened earlier in your mind, the one kept out of the sun so oil will pour without argument. The floor bears faint scuffing where feet have remembered how to stand in a group. The stone was moved for a reason, and the room keeps that reason. Outside again, you lay your cheek beside your hand on a corner and feel the cool climb toward your temple. The edge is still an edge. Rains have come and gone, winds have rehearsed their sideways script, tourists have brushed past with bags and hope. Still the plain meets the plain like law. If you turn and let your eyes climb the open face of the Sphinx's trench, its vertical channels answer back. The long handwriting of seasons. Here, the absence of that handwriting is not denial. It is timing. A wall that has not been written on by rain announces when it arrived to the conversation. You walk toward the valley-side temple, where granite blocks from far Aswan once clothed these limestone bones, skin upon bedrock, and you pause where a fragment still shows itself, red, flecked, dense, a gravity even in daylight. Run your fingers across the contact between the two stones and feel how the craftsman asked different materials to agree. The granite is the guest from a distance, the limestone is the host. Both bow to the same square. After, not first, but not lesser, a later verse repeating a melody, the land began. At a doorway, the jam faces take on the sheen that bodies give to things they touch without meaning to. Countless hands have steadied themselves here. Countless shoulders have recognized this exact height as the place to lean for a second. The stone records contact as a burnish, not a bruise. In the shadow of the lintel, a swallow returns and writes its own small sentence in flight. In, sweep, turn, out. You match it by stepping in, sweeping your gaze, turning, stepping out. The architecture has taught you a verb. You think of the men who cut these blocks from the trench while the lion was becoming himself. The same hammer that clarified a paw shaped a pier. The same chisel that finished a shoulder finished a door. A harmony of intent moves between body and house. It is not hard to believe that the crew slept well in those seasons. Few jobs let a person lift away what hides and, with the same effort, lift up what will shelter. At one corner a crack has learned to be harmless. It climbs diagonally, and then, meeting a joint, follows it politely until it disappears. The wall has chosen not to make drama. That choice belongs to buildings that trust their mass. You lay your palm flat and thank it for its discretion. Not every ancient thing needs to perform age. Some can simply continue. The sun moves, and the edges change their minds about light. Where a moment ago the arras was bright as a blade, now it breathes instead, a line turned to breath, and the plain beyond it takes on the work of being sure. You follow that certainty to the end of the wall, and find the corner meeting another corner with the same refusal of fuss. The simplicity is not simple. It is an achievement kept so long it has become a manner. From here, glance back to the basin. The contrast is a lesson easier than language. Down there, the hill shows how time writes when given water. Up here, the temples show how time is invited to behave when given a square. Both truths can coexist on the same afternoon without argument. One whispers, older. The other answers, after. The exchange is comfortable. You feel yourself relax into it. Before you leave, you press a knuckle lightly into a block and imagine the moment it left the trench. Levers under, voices counting, the stone rising, with a patience that makes men better for matching it. You imagine the same block set into its new address, its neighbors closing around it like family at a doorway. Stone borrowed from stone, a chapter torn from a book, to become the first page of another book, both stories still legible. You return to the light and let the temple release you the way good rooms do, without keeping anything it shouldn't. The Sphinx breathes its quiet across the open. The trench holds its soft handwriting. The temple keeps its sharp faces, and the simple pride of work that admits sequence without jealousy. You run your fingers one last time along an edge you could cut your thought on and think. Afterward can be faithful too. Then you go, carrying the gentle certainty that not all greatness is firstness. Some greatness is the grace of arriving next and making a place worthy of what came before. Begin with the hill as a hill. Before lions and legends, it was a shoulder of limestone lifting out of the plateau with the calm of anything that has taken its time. Wind ran its fingers across it. Brief rains traced it with the patience of years. The strata lay like pages pressed together, each layer a different sentence about seashells and silt, and the weight of what had come before. You stand in the quiet and picture the moment someone pointed and said, "Here." Not a decree so much as a recognition, the form already dreaming inside the rock, asking for a way to wake. They arrive early, when shadow still holds the ground cool. The first instruments are simple and sufficient. Stakes, cord, red ochre, plumb bob, level bowl, with its rim of water mirroring the thin blue morning. Lines are pulled taut and sung along, the old trick where two men pluck cord and measure by the note. A rectangle is argued with the earth. Corners are persuaded into rightness. On this grid, a creature will be coaxed from layered sleep. The foreman's hand moves like a sparrow through air, sketching in nothing the pause, the chest, the turn of the head toward dawn. It isn't magic. It is a plan. The hill answers to tools that know it. Dolerite pounders bruise the surface where the first trench wants to be. Copper chisels, annealed and resharpened, ask details to come forward. Wooden wedges slip into slots and take on water until the stone sighs and lets go a piece it no longer needs. The sound is a grammar you learn by listening. Thock of pounder, bright ping of copper, whisper of wedge swelling, gravelly exhale of a block finally deciding to be separate. Dust lifts and hangs, then drops like a curtain calling for the next act. They do not fight the rock, they read it. Bedding planes run like lines in a palm, telling where to insist and where to agree. A hard layer shoulders out, a soft one gives and cups shadow. Cut with the grain and the stone leaves cleanly, ready to be stacked into a block that will remember its edges. Cut against it, and the stone sulks, breaks wild, makes extra work. The best hands learn to hear the difference with the hammer still at their side. A good day is when the hill and the men keep the same tempo. Picture the trench opening by steps, first a shallow ditch that declares intention, then a broadening, then the first ledge, squared and swept so tools will not be lost. Spoil goes up by the world's oldest elevator. Hands. Baskets travel shoulder to shoulder in a living chain, feet making a music of grit and leather. The slope is matted with brush, so men can climb without sliding. A ramp snakes down inside the cut, wide enough for a sled, shallow enough for dignity. The hill gives itself away in thousands of small decisions, each one accounted for in a foreman's head, and in the ache of a back that will sleep well. Not all the stone leaves. Some remains because it is needed where it was born. As the trench deepens, a mass begins to stand out in low relief, like a thought rising in the mind. The body is not added. It is kept. The first lines of the pause appear as negatives, the spaces around them, before any toe shows its round. Men kneel to true a corner that will never be seen once the sand has returned. Others rough the curve of the chest by subtracting what is obviously not chest. The head is left tallest, a pillar of intention, until everything around it has learned the new facts of weight and width. Blocks rise from the cut with the calm of things that know they will be useful. They are skidded onto sledges and asked to travel with grace. Water pours ahead of them to lay down a temporary river of mud and mercy. Voices count in a rhythm that makes animals of men and machines of ropes. The blocks do not mind. They like being addressed as if they were guests. Some go only a little way, stacked in orderly courses where a temple will stand. Others cross the glare to a yard marked by shade where masons teach them their final edges. Stone borrowed from stone, the hill lending itself to the rooms that will dignify its revelation. At noon, the plateau goes blank. The crew learns the shape of rest. Backs against the downslopes cool, bread torn with a respectful silence. Jars sharing the same mouth with the same care you would give a friend's face. Resin pops in a small brazier. A foreman uses the moment to soften pitch for rope mends. Someone hums the counting chant anyway. 1, pull, 2, pull, because songs persist even when the rope is asleep. The hill looks the same as it did in the morning, if you count only the outline. If you count the floor swept clean of crumbs of stone and the 2 new channels caught and encouraged to run, it is changed. The creature learns its posture a handful of swipes at a time. A curve is proven by removing the one bump that offended it. A shoulder is allowed to be heavy. A line down the face is red-ruled, and then moved a width of a reed until it pleases everyone who looks. The East is consulted the way you consult a calendar, quietly, without fuss. The head's degree is argued, tested with a cord at dawn, adjusted by the thickness of a thumb. When the neck reads like a neck, the crew stops and looks, blinking like men coming out of a story. Safety is a craft of its own. Timber braces the temporary pieces that would like to become permanent too soon. Cracks are watched like animals. A man with an ear for trouble presses his temple to the stone and hears whether it is thinking of mischief. The trench's sides are given their precise slant, the one that persuades sand to behave. A new cut is not begun until the old one has proved it can keep its promise overnight. Nobody says forever. The word is too heavy to carry up and down a ramp all day. They say again, which is the true name of the work. The blocks for the temples walk off like cousins, leaving a family portrait to set the table. The ones that stay under the chisels become grace notes and breaths. The soft return at the base, where rain will someday gather and decide to go another way. The tiny slope that will turn a puddle into a memory rather than a problem. The plain trude so a shadow will behave. The creature's back is brushed until it takes light like skin, even though it is stone. The paws are negotiated, how much weight to show, how much rest. Evenings come with the gift of blue, heat loosens its hand, dust falls out of the air and becomes honest ground again. Someone sharpens copper in the last light, the shower of bright curls like fish jumping. Someone else taps a string full of red across a curve that will be tomorrow's work. The foreman walks alone once, the way a man counts his children by touching their sleeping shoulders. He knows the hill's new name before anyone says it aloud. The day arrives when the head is allowed to be the head. The pillar thins and becomes a neck. The neck takes the tilt it has been promising, and the first true gaze is aimed where morning lives. The crew sees it before the priest does. They don't cheer. They put down their tools and breathe out, because that is what you do when something that was bound has been unbound without breaking. In the silence that follows, even the flies seem to reconsider their tasks. What remains is the long labor of finishing, not ornament for ornament's sake, but the kind of care that prevents weather from making choices you would rather make yourself. Edges are introduced to the idea of rounding where rounding will be kind. Planes are asked to meet exactly where exactness will train light to behave. Channels are convinced to carry water where water will do the least harm and the most truth. The hill is not conquered. It is brought into conversation with the sky and taught a few phrases it will use for centuries. When you picture it all, as dust and schedules and lunches and the tug of rope in the hands of men whose names the stone does not keep, you feel a weight that is not sadness settle over your ribs. It is the respectable heaviness of effort spent on something that will not know your name and does not need to. The lion did not leap from bedrock fully formed. It was invited. It was coaxed with understanding, with repeats, with listening. A creature did not so much arrive as continue. Night closes as gently as a gate in a courtyard. The trench holds a little cool. The temples keep their squares. A draft creeps along the floor where the day's heat has gone to think. If you listen carefully, you can still hear the work, the chant diluted to a hum, the thok and the ping receding to memory. The hill lies shaped, the creature awake, the plateau reorganized around a face that knows where the sun will be. Sleep takes the scene into itself and smooths it further. What remains when you drift is the simplest story. Stone learning its next sentence, and 1,000 hands patient enough to help it speak. Before the first color arrives, the plateau is made of hush. You can hear your own coat breathe, the tiny scrapes of grit negotiating your sandals, a far dog attending to its agenda in a village that has not yet decided to be loud. The air holds that blue before blue, when night has loosened its grip, but hasn't quite let go. You walk to the spot you chose yesterday by watching shadows, where the horizon dips a finger width between two low humps, and you stand still enough that the day will have to find you. The Sphinx has already chosen its place. It always has. The body keeps its long syllable of rest. The paws hold a forward patience. The head leans the precise degree that reads, "I'm listening." You follow the line from the eyes to the dark seam of the world, and feel the tug of a promise older than names. No inscription needs to tell you what is about to happen. The face and the edge of the earth are in conversation, and the sentence they share is shorter than any prayer. Now. Equinox is the year's hinge. The day and the night cut equal. The scale pans even, the sky deciding without drama. The sunrise on these mornings is not a shout. It is a measured disclosure. The first thin blade appears where you expected it, exactly where the gaze has been waiting all year to greet it head-on, not a hair north or south. For a breath you feel the line that runs from your sternum out through that bright seam and back into the stone's eyes, a thread pulled tight by light. When the edge brightens, the Sphinx does not flinch. That is its whole art. It does not reach for the sun, it receives it. The first wash finds the brow, and what was shaped turns purposeful. A narrow ribbon of gold lays itself along the top plane of the headcloth, lengthens to the ears, and pauses, as if asking the day for permission to proceed. Then it drops, brow to cheek, cheek to muzzle, and the carved planes begin to teach the sunlight how to behave. The chest takes a broad, slow spill. The pause light last, as if time itself is descending a stair and knows better than to hurry. You watch how the stone turns the sun into a clock without carving any numbers. The shadow line along the foreleg is a hand that cannot decide to be inaccurate. A drip of light slips down the flank, meets a seam, and bends as predictably as any rule. Each ledge in the enclosure draws its own fine horizon and then gives it away to the next. A little later, the narrow slot between paw and pedestal brightens and releases a dark wedge that everyone with a broom recognizes as the moment to begin. The place runs on these cues. It always has. Somewhere behind you, the river is learning its own color again, and boats are remembering their errands. That world exists, and you are glad for it, but here a different economy is kept. In old seasons, someone would have stood where you are, with a bowl of water set to stillness, and a chord set to true. The bowl is not here this morning. The chord is not plucked. The east is adequate as an instrument. Even if the stars had shuffled a step in their slow processional dance, even if names have changed and stories have traded gods for other gods, the sun's equinoctial habit, due east, due west, remains stubborn and useful. The stone knows the same truth a child with a stick knows. When light arrives straight, you can check your house against it. Equinox is a service day for memory. In the years when cults were busy and linen was starched into meaning, this morning would have held a small ceremony, the kind that appears only to mark continuities, not to advertise beginnings. A mat rolled out, a jar unstopped, bread that would be welcome as breakfast on any table, a short hymn that always forgot the third verse, and nobody minded. The tasks were the point. Someone swept the approach. Someone brushed sand from a threshold and then set the broom down in its proper lean. Someone checked the line from the eyes to the world and nodded at the way it still cut straight through dawn. Nothing was invented. Everything was recognized. You let your own recognition be quiet. A person full of explanation would spoil a morning like this. Put your hands behind your back. Let your shoulders drop one finger width. Match your breath to the lights arriving. Long in, longer out, until the portion of you that insists on understanding takes a seat and allows the portion that simply attends to stand up and do its job. The plateau helps. It doesn't require your commentary. It is a good host that prefers you to enjoy the soup without announcing the recipe. On days that are not equinox, the sun plays a little to the north or south of the stair. The stone doesn't mind. It practices patience, which is the real discipline taught here. But today is the calibration. Today the gaze and the edge are coaxial, and the eye can feel it. The wordless click is not in your ear, it is in your bones. A rightness with no adjectives, a plumb line of light racked into its notch. To your left, a temple wall keeps its shadow like folded cloth, deciding moment by moment how much to give back. The crisp arises cut their own sundial without needing to know they've been hired. A bird crosses the trapezoid of sky above the enclosure and becomes, for 2 heartbeats, the only thing that moves. You mark that too, not because it matters to time, but because mornings are made generous by small extras. As the sun clears its first finger width, the plateau shrugs on a temperature, and the colors graduate out of theory. Sand takes a tone that remembers honey. Limestone wakes as a page meant for ink. The red granite that remains here and there, relics of an older skin laid over the bone, flashes iron at the exact angle that always gives you a sense of a smith's hand nearby. People begin to sound like people again, voices tested experimentally, footsteps turning from private to public. The spell does not break, it completes. The day has been started. The clock that does not tick is now, nevertheless, keeping perfect time. You consider all the calendars you know, scrolls with boxes, priestly rosters with feasts done up in careful ink, astronomical tables that can long divide an angle into arcseconds, and none of them could be more explicit than this gaze. The lion faces where the year balances. It is both act and advice. It says align. It says begin from true. It says remember the equal share of night and day, and take it into your work the way masons take the line in their hands before the first blow. You do not need the inscription, because the lesson is not a sentence, it is a posture. Once you see that, you cannot unsee it. Every right angle in the temples echoes the same request. Every joint that meets the next joint without quarrel demonstrates the same ethics. Know where you are. Meet what meets you. Keep your measure over time. The Sphinx teaches by looking. The room teaches by being square. The plateau teaches by holding both in the same morning and never asking for applause. A breeze lifts, and with it a ribbon of last cool slips past your wrists and is gone. Somewhere, a caretaker begins the slow sweep that moves the day forward. If you stand long enough, you will watch the shadow in the shallow between paw and ground step backward the width of your thumb every minute or so, patient as an elder counting. If you leave now, you will carry the count in your ribs and find yourself measuring other things by it, the fairness of a sentence, the fit of a promise, the way a door speaks when it closes. You look once more along the line from the carved eyes to the horizon, and you feel gratitude for the plainness of the instrument, not a wheeled device, not a water clock arguing in steady drips, not an inscription boasting its survival. Just a face stubbornly aligned to where the light will always return at this hinge of the year. Timekeeping by not looking away. When you finally step back, the sun is fully a coin and the plateau has decided to be busy. You carry the click of rightness into the clutter, a small tuning fork humming behind your sternum. The stone will go on staring through dawn tomorrow and the day after, whether cloud agrees to show its work or not. That is its promise. Yours is smaller and maybe harder, to remember the equal measure when the world prefers extremes, to let your own gaze find a horizon that steadies you, to begin from true as often as you can manage. The monument asks nothing more and nothing less. You begin with your hands empty and your pockets full of measures no one can take from you. A span between thumb and little finger becomes a yard. The step becomes a rod. The breath becomes a metronome. You close your eyes and hold the Sphinx, the temples, the great geometry beyond them in your mind, not as blocks and dust, but as relations. The plateau softens into a page. The monuments lay their lines across it. Numbers surface like ink that never fades. You have stood at corners enough to know that proportion is a kind of kindness. It asks everything to carry its share, and nothing more. The square of a base is not a boast. It is a promise. Equal, 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 equal. You walk the imagined perimeter in thought, counting the slow beat of strides, the way a surveyor might sing his chord taut. Across the emptiness inside the shape, you lift a diagonal, and feel the tilt of it in your ribs. The wind, which knows nothing of integers, still respects the square. It turns a corner and behaves. Above that ground figure rises the old problem solved with patience. How to aim a slope so that weight agrees to be weight without complaint. You think of the long plane lifting from base to summit, a sheet of will. Set it too shallow, and the thing is timid. Too steep, and the stone will mutter, and then shout, and then fail. There is a middle that is not compromise, but character. Your body knows it before your mouth names it. 40-something degrees is a guess you wave away. The truth is not a number yet. It is the feel of a triangle whose bones have met and chosen friendship. The mind goes to circles even when the eye sees squares. You take the perimeter that your imaginary feet have paced, and you hold it next to the height you can only dream, because the cap no longer stands. Divide the walk of the base by the climb of the body, and the result in your head begins to smell like a shoreline you have walked before. 2 turns around a circle's rim for every straight journey up. It is not exactness you love here. It is the intention. Someone set a square on the earth and then taught it to speak circle. The ratio whispers its own old name. You do not need to recite it to hear it. A constant that outlives empires learning to hide in a mound of stone. You tip the figure and examine the triangle tucked in its side, the half base laid along the ground, the height rising, the slanted face that connects them. The slanted leg seems to have been chosen not with a ruler, but with an ear. When the lengths sing together, the triangle hums a harmony the Greeks would later write poems about. Half the base to the height to the slanted length, the mind reaches for that other ancient companion of proportion, the one that turns shells and leaves and cities into things that please hands and eyes without needing to be taught. You are careful with the idea. Stones do not read treatises. But you cannot help feeling the triangle's composure as a chord you've heard in other living forms. Numbers keep their manners when carved into the world with measure. The slope is a sentence that remains grammatical regardless of weather. It is not the digits that survive the sand. No one has chiseled them to be worn away. But the relations. Scratch at the surface of wind-soft corners, and the angle inside persists, the way a melody persists, even when a violin is out of tune. The face can crumble. The ratio remains in the gesture the face once held. People like to put hands on what can be counted. An ancient crew did so with cubits, a unit married to the arm. You do so with the length of your stride, married to your own bones. You picture the old cord knotted at that measure moving across the foundation, 4 times and back, until the square convinces itself it is true. The water in the leveling tray goes to stillness and declares a plane. A plumb line stops twisting and declares a vertical. The numbers are not mystical in their beginnings. They are the record of patience. Yet the patience records something larger than itself, relations that the wind cannot cudgel and the sun cannot bleach. If you lengthen the line of the height in your thought, stretch it gently, as if pulling taffy, you discover how scaling behaves like a blessing. A thing can be made 10 times taller and 10 times wider, and the fit of its parts will not complain. Proportion is citizenship that travels. It keeps its manners in any language of size. This is why numbers do not die when they are born out of relation rather than inscription. They are habits, not statues. You examine light with the same care. On mornings when the sun keeps an even bargain between day and night, the gaze and the horizon make a rightness you can feel without counting. The angle between the stare and the edge is zero, in a way that asks nothing of arithmetic. Zero here is not absence, but agreement. On other days, the small annual wander north or south writes its own fraction in the trench, a slender blade of shadow shortening and lengthening that can be kept in a priest's head or a farmer's hand. Time taught with no numerals is nevertheless time taught. In the cool of an imagined inner chamber, you let your breath bounce back from stone and consider lengths used to calm stone's will. A roof beam laid across the narrow measure of a room makes a statement about span and stress that does not require characters to proclaim it. Two supports placed neither too far apart nor too close do a job that could be choked by text. The beam thanks the piers for their spacing by standing a very long time. That gratitude is also a number, if you care to count it. Numbers that endure prefer humility. A mason's thumb set on a line to see if it agrees is a kind of digit too. The thumb does not brag when it is right. It confirms and moves on. When the day's work is swept up, the ratios are still there in the things they guided. A child could sleep under them and receive the lesson by dawn light. This much to that much, over and over, in a lullaby that never uses words. You imagine a future where names are worn to stone dust, where lists of donors and kings have returned to quiet. What will remain are the behaviors that were chosen. A wall meets another wall without sulking. A ramp leans with humane intent. A face aims where the year balances. You could rebuild the vanished digits from the behavior alone, the way a good ear can find the key from the last note. Even if the measures vary, one century's cubit swallowing another's by a thumb's width, the relations police themselves. There is a temptation to make miracles of this. You resist it the way a careful scribe resists flourishes on a line that needs to be read 3,000 years from now. The miracle is that measure, wielded with respect, becomes meaning. If someone once taught a square to speak circle, they did so with chord and level, not with lightning. Yet the speech learned to cross time like lightning crosses a sky, instantly, obviously, by the truth in the path it takes. The wind gusts and then relaxes. In your mind, the facets drink and spill the day as if demonstrating proof after proof. Every shadow is a line segment made of night. Every highlight a ratio between angle and hour. The pyramid that is not drawn here still stands in the geometry you are holding, a memory of lines in a place made of stone. You measure without moving. The act is its own rest. When at last you open your eyes and look around at the visible, you find you have borrowed steadiness from invisible arithmetic. Perimeter to height, half base to height, angle to light, distance to time. None of it is news. All of it is nourishment. Numbers that do not die are not the ones engraved to be admired. They are the ones embodied to be used. You step away carrying them the way the body carries balance, quietly, completely, almost forgetting they are there until a slope or a corner asks you to prove you remember. You begin by stepping nowhere at all, only down into the thought of down. The plateau, bright and declarative under sun, turns in your mind and shows its underside. What was surface becomes ceiling. What was horizon collapses to a slit of light above a mouth in the stone. Rope lowers through your breath. You put your palm on an imagined jam still cool from night, and the grain of limestone answers your skin like paper answering a pen. Then you descend. The first shaft is a throat that has learned to be polite. It is scarcely wider than your shoulders, and prefers you to face the wall, not the fall. Your lamp, call it a flame, or a phone, or a memory of either, casts a truth close to the stone and lets the rest be theory. Tool marks run in their old cadence, shallow, parallel strokes, each a metronome tick frozen to surface. You follow them downward, the way a fingertip follows script. Dust loosens from its long sleep and drifts past your cheek with the resigned grace of old librarians. A landing announces itself by echo. The sound that was all return learns to pause, to collect itself, to decide. You step off the ladder and into a room whose ceiling is lower than your haughtiness and higher than your fear. Square cuts meet square cuts with the same calm you felt above ground. Here the right angle is more than geometry, it is reassurance. The room is not decorated, it is correct. From one wall, a passage leads away in the exact way a sentence leads away from a capital, sure of its grammar even before it finds its verb. You are not alone, though no one is with you. Water keeps house in the lower air. You smell it, mineral, old, shy. Where the wall meets the floor, a dark ribbon runs, no wider than a thumb, the residue of a season when the stone remembered a river it once was. Your light finds a niche, then another, regular as breaths in a sleeping chest. The niches are not for drama, they are addresses in a district of purpose. A low plinth occupies the room's center, not a coffin and not a table, something that refuses your categories and wins your respect for the refusal. It belongs by refusal alone. You move on, down again, then level, then down, and the plateau opens like a folded plan. Shafts behave like streets, chambers come where crossings would. The sense of a city grows, but one built out of space rather than stone, a civic order drawn with absence. The corridors keep temperate. They remember how to help men work and keep them working. In each, the air slows your heart to a rate that allows numbers to settle in your ribs and stay. The length from pier to pier feels measured even when your hand carries no cord. A beam overhead makes the sound of span and gratitude. The supports thank one another under your fingers with a hum as low as patience. You kneel. The floor tells longer stories than the walls. A thin crust of calcite, ice written in another language, hugs a corner where drips have made and remade a promise. Someone once swept here. The arc of that motion remains in the scumble of fine grit, a smile left behind by a broom. You touch the trace the way one touches a signature 100 years after the hand is gone, not to claim ownership, only to affirm relation. The second city introduces you to its citizens, habits, measures, the usefulness of modest spans. Farther in, the ceiling lowers until you have to angle your head, a bow that is not quite voluntary and is, in any case, appropriate. The passage opens without warning into a chamber that receives sound as if it had been tuned for receiving. Whisper, and the whisper travels the perimeter like a polite guest greeting every corner. Speak, and your voice comes back softened, not scolded. You listen with skin as well as ears. The stone wants a certain tone from you, and out of respect you offer it. A room that instructs without words is a good teacher. A ladder's wood is damp where it meets the next level and grows darker the way bread grows dark under a flame. You expect cold and are greeted by something else. Stillness with weight. The light asks less and learns more. Water gathers here in a rectangle cut to a size that suggests intention. You hold your lamp over it and see a second chamber traveling upside down. Your face appears, changed by the company it's keeping. The water is not meant for drinking or bathing. It is meant for keeping. It keeps secrets. It keeps time. It keeps the lower city in a discipline of quiet that the world above will never master. You stand at the edge and let the idea of seasons move around your ankles. In flood years, this basin would have filled to its mark, kissing a line on the wall that is visible now as a pale collar. In lean years, the basin would have kept only a sheet, mirror-thin, ceremonial in its own right for how much sky it could admit. Either way, the room's proportions hold. The water does not argue with the geometry, it quotes it. Beyond, a door that is not quite a door closes an onward passage. It is cut from the rock itself, a slab held by the same patience that holds everything else. No inscription claims it. Two small protrusions, pins, pegs, the ends of some ancient idea, gleam with a stubborn dignity. You do not push. The lower city is generous with rooms and parsimonious with progress. It likes you to earn your map by waiting as much as by walking. Turn back and count steps. Your count becomes a poem before you realize it. Repeating lines, small variations, a refrain about the ceiling height you can feel instead of see. At a junction, you mark the wall with your thumb's print, and then find someone else's faint mark just beyond. You smile at the old coincidence of minds, the need to say I was here at a place designed to outlast all arrivals. The print will fade, the plan will not. In one long hall, the ceiling exposes what the hill is made of as neatly as a page exposes its fibers when torn. Bands of harder and softer stone run like music staves over your head. Here the carvers went with the grain when they could, and coached it gently when they had to go across. You can see where a bedding plane fooled a crew and made more work. The correction is humble and exact. A small stepped cut, a lost hour, a lesson kept. Above ground you measured triangles with your breath. Below ground you learn respect for layers. Sit. Extinguish your light. If fear rises, let it stand beside you and look around. The dark rearranges the city differently than light does. Ventilation announces itself because it must. You draft its course along your forearm. The passages you walked become a memory of temperature. The lower rooms tell you their sizes by the length of the silence after your swallow. You measure the labyrinth without seeing it, and discover that seeing had been a luxury, not a requirement. You relight and climb, because all cities want you to leave them better for having visited, not emptied by your presence. In a chamber halfway back to the world, your lamp finds the ghost footprint of a wooden scaffold long vanished, its imprint recorded in a faint stain, and two shallow pockets where a brace once pressed. You count those too, not as relics, but as proofs of care. Above, a vertical shaft shows the polish of generations of hands and ropes, and within that polish a narrow groove where a line once ran true, plumb teaching stone how to behave. At last the mouth expands and color happens, the kind of yellow only desert light can manage, both generous and stern. Your lungs forget they were counting water and begin counting heat again. You step back onto sand, which pretends it has been waiting to shift this whole time, as if the second city had not been holding it steady under logic. You carry up with you a plan that has not been drawn, a civic sense that requires no street names. When someone asks later where you went, you will say down, and their face will perform incomprehension, and you will be content. The Undercity is not a secret because it is hidden. It is a secret because it teaches by refusal. It refuses to be spectacle. It refuses the drama of names. It keeps the ethic of right angle and modest span alive, where light cannot flatter it. Geometry under sand, a humble republic of voids, speaking the same language as the monuments above, only in a softer voice. Back at the edge of the basin you look once more at the pause, the chest, the patient tilt toward dawn. You know now that the gaze is half the story. The other half lives below, in rooms that hold their breath, so the gaze can be steady, a city of sun and a city of sleep. Between them, a hill shaped into witness, and beneath it, a labyrinth that keeps witness honest. You begin on your stomach, cheek against cool limestone, eyes at the level of the floor, because the aperture is at the level of the floor. The passage is not a passage for people. It is a breath, Stone's idea of how to speak with the sky without inviting footsteps. Into this breath you send a small creature on wheels, with a lamp for a face and a cable for a tail. Its light is modest and committed. It does not promise revelation. It promises forward. The shaft receives the visitor with the dry courtesy of long-kept things. The walls are polished in a way that suggests care more than display. Tool marks plain to a whisper, corners trued, and then taught to soften so they will not quarrel with time. The angle is steep enough to make you feel the weight of gravity in your teeth, even though you are not the one climbing. The robot's treads find a friction that would deny you. Its lamp splash moves like a bead of water along a reed. Behind, the coil pays out, a gentle unspooling that measures distance and patience. On the monitor propped against your forearm, the stone advances, one palm span at a time. A grain, a seam, a tiny drift of powder, where centuries of settling have made dust of decisions. The shaft narrows just enough to remind intent to be humble. Tiny creatures, flies made of stray glints, not life, flicker and vanish as the lamp reassigns them to dark. You expect the end to be a collapse, a shrug of rubble announcing that geometry, like everything, eventually tires. Instead, the light finds order. A rectangle interrupts the receding symmetry, a slab so precisely cut, it ennobles the smallness of the lamp. Two copper pins protrude like punctuation. They are not hinges. They are not handles. They are a pair of deliberate dots, as if the stone had written a sentence, and then chosen to stop twice, to be sure. There is a kind of refusal that feels like insult. This is not that. This is a refusal like a closed eye at prayer. The slab does not deny you. It maintains itself. Your breath slows without your consent. Even the robot seems to lean back on its treads in recognition, a pilgrim meeting a threshold that knows its work. You measure the little room made by arrival, shaft, slab, the short forecourt where the lamp can set its pool of light. The copper has aged like seaweed turned to metal. Greens within browns within a patience you can smell. Hammer strokes long resolved into surface catch the glow and give it back in signatures too shy to read. On the monitor the frame holds still as if the image itself has bowed. Then comes the second device, an instrument of permission-seeking, not of force. A bit barely wider than a straw turns again, warm filings curling like a new script you are careful not to breathe. The air smells of 10,000 quiet years, being invited into a single minute. Through the small round, you push a thinner light, a flexible eye with manners. The shaft behind you waits the way a congregation waits when a door opens in the back of a sanctuary. The lamp slides through. Stone becomes light, becomes stone again. You have time to think the word empty, and then to correct yourself. Emptiness here is a form of content. The cavity is clean and exact, a pause kept between words so the sentence can breathe. The floor is free of the accidents of hurry. The ceiling is the color of reason. Your small eye sweeps and stops because there is nowhere else to go. Directly ahead, not an arm's length from the first, another slab. Another pair of copper pins, twin to the first in dignity and in their refusal to mean anything as simple as pull here. One door, then another. A grammar of not yet. The second rectangle absorbs the lamp's shine and keeps it as if light were a letter addressed to the future. You lie there with a cable across your wrist and consider architecture as a practice of patience. The builders could have left the shafts as shafts, ideas of air and star set into limestone. Instead, they taught the passages to stop, and then to stop again. It is a design without hurry, a double negative of access that produces a positive, protection, not against you who have brought your breath and your care, but against time's usual habits, dust's ambition, animals, curiosity, the accidents of men when men are busy. Someone whispers why, and the question is reasonable and also premature. The doors are doors to a concept, boundary as devotion. The copper pins are not fingers inviting grasp, but the quiet badge of a threshold that knows it is a threshold. If there is a chamber beyond, it refuses spectacle by design. If there is only more stone, choosing to be stone for the length of a human memory, then the lesson is stricter and perhaps kinder. Some hollows exist to teach restraint. You rewind the film in your mind and play the approach again, the long incline, the decision to make the last square inch as careful as the first, the choice to adorn denial with metal that will survive to express it. Even the scale is instructive. The monument is enormous. The doors are toy small. Grandeur holds back with a child's latch. The paradox is the point. The largest things are guarded by the gentlest limits. Outside the shaft, the day has its errands, brooms, tickets, a cloud arguing with the sun in a language of shadows. Inside, your small screen shows a stillness that is not passive. You watch until the watching becomes its own work, and the work becomes its own gratitude. There is no code to crack, only a compact to respect. In a world that confuses knowing with opening, here is a place designed to remember that the two are not synonyms. You think of lungs and their doors, epiglottis closing when it should, opening when it must. Breath has its own ethics of refusal. Without it, life drowns in what it cannot help but invite. The shafts are anatomy made of stone. What they keep for later is as important as what they release to now. Copper pins mark the hinge between eras, the way cartilage marks the hinge between swallow and speech. You reverse the robot by inches, as if backing away from an altar. The little wheels obey with a seriousness you cannot help but respect. Cable gathers in a soft coil like a silenced question. At the mouth you lift the machine into your arms and set it down the way one sets a sleeping child, inventing care even though no one has taught you how to cradle a device. Nothing has been revealed in the gaudy sense, and yet your measure of the place has deepened. Thresholds, it turns out, are content. The first door invited you to compose yourself. The second door invited you to keep that composure even after you had earned the right to be impatient. The empty room between taught you that emptiness is sometimes the best container for meaning. You will not forget the triple gift: approach, pause, refusal. Back above, the low rooms of the temple loan you their shade. You sit for a minute with your forearms on your knees and watch dust hang where a beam of light invites it to perform. The dust accepts and then declines, falling out of the roll as gently as it entered. The world is full of small refusals that keep balance. A shadow refuses to be more than the edge asks. A seam refuses to pretend to be a curve. A keeper refuses to hurry the sweep. Your mind wanders to other sealed things, letters kept for heirs, jars buried with seeds that will not germinate until heat relents, stories that refuse a last paragraph until the listener has earned an earlier chapter. You wonder whether the pins in the stone are less about guarding a what, and more about protecting a when. The oldest technology might be scheduling. The most profound message might be timing. The sun slides, unsealing the afternoon. Tourists become a tide, then an eddy, then a thin scattering of silhouettes. You rise, coil the last of the cable, and touch your knuckles to the stone, because that is how one thanks a host who has said very little. Behind the wall continues a logic you were allowed to meet, but not to master. One day there may be a hand with a better question. One day the door may decide it has been patient long enough. Or not. Endurance is its own kind of answer. As you walk away, you feel the doors following you in the only way doors can, by remaining exactly where they are. Their refusal is strangely permissive. It lets the rest of the monument speak without being forced to explain. The equinox gaze can keep time. The numbers can hold their ratios. The labyrinth below can practice its silent civics. And at the end of two breathless vents, two small slabs remind everyone that a culture is measured not only by what it builds and opens, but also by what it seals and keeps. Night will come, and with it the cool that makes even limestone thoughtful. In that dark, the copper will remember fire. The pins will keep their small vigil, and the stone will continue to hold the word not yet, with a dignity that asks for nothing but your agreement. You give it easily. Some doors are not problems to be solved. They are promises to be kept. You enter the granite the way you enter sleep, slowly, with the body remembering to be quiet before the mind does. The corridor narrows and then releases, and you step into a room that has already decided what your voice will do. The temperature is its own kind of instruction, a cool that asks your shoulders to lower, a hush that puts a hand on the bell of your chest and invites it to open without making a sound. 4 walls of red-flecked stone hold their breath. The joints are seams of certainty, so tight they read as decisions rather than contacts. Blocks hauled from a river's far country have been asked to assemble as if they were one thing, and they have agreed. Overhead, a ceiling of granite beams turns weight into grammar. Every surface is a kept promise. The empty stone box at the far end waits with the patience so thorough it feels like a presence. The room is not decorated. It is tuned. You test the air with a hum you would be embarrassed to offer any other space. Low, almost private, the sort of note people try on in shower corners and forget as soon as it leaves them. Here it does not leave you. The room accepts the sound and holds it up to your ear the way a mother steadies a child's first steps. You feel the answer before you hear it, under the breastbone, along the fact of your ribs, inside the hinge at the back of your jaw. The granite replies not with echo, which is a trick of cliff and canyon, but with sustain. Tone becomes weather. You lengthen the note, as if rolling a thread between finger and thumb. Something in the walls recognizes the length and corrects it, just a little, nudging you down a breath, asking for a pitch that belongs to the stone more than it belongs to you. When you find it, the air in the room stands differently. A pressure that had been nowhere becomes everywhere. It is not loud, it is dense. The hum passes through your shirt collar, through the small hollows above your collarbones and writes itself along the cords of your neck. The floor receives it like rain on a drum. You move half a step to the left, and the note loosens. Half a step to the right, and it thickens, as if you had walked into a column of invisible wood. You are discovering furniture made of sound, nodes and corridors arranged by a geometry with no edges. If you stop humming for a breath, the room keeps the tone a heartbeat longer than physics would allow anywhere else you have stood. It is as if the chamber has its own will to continue, a bowl of sound that refuses to spill until it has shown you the curve of its lip. With the enthusiasm of a child mapping a house by running, you walk different lines and offer different vowels. A short U will do, or a long O. The chamber likes the round ones, the ones that keep the mouth soft and the throat free. You tune yourself to it by untensing. A higher tone skates along the granite and vanishes politely. A lower one gathers substance as if the stone were kneading it, adding weight until the hum carries a shape you could rest your hand on. You begin to find pockets where the sound pulls itself into stillness, little eddies of quiet within the larger river. Step forward the width of your foot, and the hum reappears, a friendly animal brushing your side. You lay your palm flat to the wall and hum again. The stone is not vibrating in the way cheap things vibrate. It is holding tone the way a cello holds tone, alive without complaining, sympathetic without wobble. Your fingertips receive microthunders. The skin on your forearm registers an argument between silence and sound that ends in a chord. The hair along your wrist learns to listen. You think of quartz, the sand caught in granite's teeth, the tiny crystals married to the stone's strength, and you imagine them tightening their shoulders and then relaxing in cadence with your breath. You do not need a textbook word for what they do. You only need to feel that they are doing it. The box in the corner is part of the lesson. People have climbed into it with permission and hummed, and the world has narrowed to a chamber within a chamber, sound inside sound. You choose the gentler courtesy. You lean over the edge and let a fingertip tap its rim. The note that comes back is not surprised. It has always been there, waiting in the grain for a chance to show itself. You hum to match it, and the two tones braid like smoke. For one indulgent measure, your body is an instrument someone else has left in the room for you to play. You are more resonator than musician, and more apprentice than either. Angles reveal themselves as ethics. The chamber accepts a hum that is honest about its length. Anything forced, anything performed, falls away. You cannot show off here. The room has been built to reward patience, breath, and attention. The sound you bring is returned to you shaved of hurry. You discover that sustaining a note is less about lungs and more about refusing to tighten. The walls have spent thousands of years practicing refusal. They teach by example. Your mind, eager to be useful, begins to count. You listen for a ratio hiding in the way high harmonics bloom a width above the fundamental, in the way a second note wants to sit beside the first without quarrel. You think of the old friends you met above, proportions that belong to spirals and squares, and you reach for their cousins in air. 2 and 3, 5 and 8. Not digits carved anywhere, but relations you can feel in the way sound decides to share space with itself. You are tempted to make a system of it. The room suggests you wait. Its arguments are made of sensation, long before they are made of notes on a line. You lie down on the floor and let the hum be a ceiling, then a bed. In this attitude, you understand the beams above you as strings under tension, their mass turned into patience by spacing chosen with care. You can almost hear the calculus of their distances, though calculus is the wrong century's word for it. The right word is listening. The builders listened to what the stone wanted to be, and arranged burdens so that they would feel like jobs rather than punishments. The reward is this: a ceiling that does not groan, a wall that does not sulk, a room that hums back when you ask politely. For a moment you let the hum fall to a whisper and then to a thought. The aftersound in the chamber is a second voice, a ghost of your tone with more room in it. It lives for a breath and dies with a courtesy that makes you believe in good endings. Silence returns not as emptiness, but as reset. You have the odd sense that the room keeps a memory of the notes it has welcomed, as if tone could leave a fingerprint. Perhaps it is only your own inner ear continuing to ring. Either way, you stand quieter than you sat. You try a consonant and the chamber declines it. The click of tongue against palate scatters like a flock. This place prefers vowels, prefers the long, unbroken gifts. Speech is information. Song is relation. The stone chooses relation. You oblige. Your hum becomes less about pitch and more about willingness. You let the room pick your note for you. It does, and you accept, and something in your chest unclenches that you hadn't known was clenched. Around the edges of hearing, other rooms answer. You remember the long corridor behind you, the way it gathered and released, the way steps felt counted even when you were not counting. You think of the chambers above the ceiling, spaces made to absorb anger from stone and give it back as composure. You suspect they too have their preferences. A building with this much discipline does not leave any part of itself untuned. Upstairs and downstairs, numbers and materials keep an agreement. Granite is the oath that makes the agreement believable. Speculation arrives like a guest with good manners, late and only after listening. Was this built for sound? For joining breath to stone, and letting the shared note do whatever work notes can do to minds and bodies? Or is the humming a byproduct of excellence, a kindness that arrives when geometry refuses to be sloppy? You do not need an answer tonight. The question is a tone of its own. You hum into it, and the room hums back, and the conversation is sufficient. When you finally stand and gather your feet under you, the chamber lets you go the way an instrument lets a last vibration spend itself, without complaint, without clutching. The corridors outside seem narrower in the wake of such spacious quiet. When your hand touches limestone again, the softer stone feels suddenly like cloth after glass. You are surprised to discover you miss the pressure of the sound along your bones. The hum has become a measure you did not know you were carrying. Back in open air, light seems louder than it did. The world resumes its angles of shouting and shine. You keep a portion of the chamber under your sternum anyway. A small, low, polite note that waits there, ready to be matched if ever you find a room worthy of it. A person can live a long time on a tone like that. A monument can live longer. Somewhere behind you, granite continues to hold its breath the way good listeners do, without impatience, without agenda, ready to answer when asked with care. If you place your palm on your own chest in the sun and hum, you will feel a softer echo, not the stones, but the lesson. Tune before you speak. Sustain what deserves sustaining. Let silence be the final sound. You leave the plateau without moving, the way a thought leaves a room and keeps the room in it. The desert thins to dusk, and dusk pulls like a thread through other places where stone has learned similar manners. You follow that thread not as a traveler with luggage, but as a listener crossing thresholds that happen to be far apart. The stars are the same, which is the oldest convenience. They bind distances into a single page. First, a plain where grass keeps the memory of chalk. A ring stands there, set with uprights that once shouldered lintels the way friends shoulder a door frame at a party and become the doorway. The circle faces the light like a disciplined choir. Midwinter sunrise cleaves the stones, midsummer sunset answers from the opposite rim. A single heel of stone to the east plays the role of cue. Tenons and mortises make carpentry out of rock, joints as confident as wrists. No script appears on the ring. No boast. No plan. The measure is all in the meeting of season and stone, in the way a shadow makes the hour legible by choosing where not to fall. Sheep graze through this astronomy without offense. Larks write their own soft geometry above it. The place refuses to be about one morning. It keeps both solstices and everything between. South now, to a desert that was once a green argument with the sky. In a low basin, dark boulders remember lakes the way old men remember rivers. Exactly, without dates. A scatter of stones, small enough to be overlooked by anyone in a hurry, stands in a circle so minute it feels like a whisper. The sun's habits touch it anyway. At the turnings of the year, the light skims a line in the gravel that is not an accident. Cattle were painted not far from here when the rains came and left. The stones watch as the monsoon bargains with the Sahara, and they hold their alignment without comment. If anyone ever carved a name on them, the wind did what wind does best, and returned it to the element it came from. Across water, underwater, a stair meets the sea and keeps descending, riser after riser into a bluer logic. Terrace becomes terrace, until the human words for natural and made are less useful than the eye's reminder that some forms are comfortable with both. Angles hold under the salt's patient attack. Fish practice their own processions along edges that don't know the century. The sunk steps do not offer answers. They propose a question with the steadiness of a tide. If a landscape chooses right angles, does intention require a signature, or is a kept proportion enough? Rise to air in a country of high light and cold night, where mountain spines carry cities the way shoulders carry shawls. A circle is cut down rather than built up, concentric terraces fielded like bowls nested in bowls. Wind moves the temperature across the steps as if tuning them. This level keeps longing in. That one admits frost and learns from it. Seeds travel between circles the way musicians trade themes. Nobody writes experiment on a stone. The circles say it in the eloquence of results. Farther along the ridge, walls meet with the insolence of perfection. Blocks introduced so well they forgot they were strangers. You place your palm on a joint and feel more than engineering. You feel a decision kept long after makers left the decision's shade. Turn to a valley where an old river took its time. A city there unrolls in rectangles and circles that agreed to be neighbors. The great round rooms sunk just enough to make voices behave, the streets that point like fingers to the cardinal answers. A road leaves north, with a faith you can feel under your feet, and keeps going toward a horizon that offers no town to justify the effort. The sun arrives in apertures tuned for it, darts of light shot on purpose into the deep of rooms on days that matter. Roof beams remember angles no one living now would guess, without sitting very still in winter and watching a slit of day crawl and stop. Elsewhere a hill is not a hill but a hollow tuned to swallow dawn at the coldest turn. A long passage aims through earth with a patience that can only be measured in centuries of mornings that failed to fit. And then one day a blade of sun travels the floor like a hand, finds the chamber's back, and lays its palm precisely where the builders intended to place it. Spirals cut into stone surface from darkness as if lit from within. Then the light leaves and the room returns to discipline. Whoever laid the line from the door to that brief angle chose to teach time with a single lesson offered once each year, which is about the right portion for humility. Travel again, and the pillars are T-shaped, the reliefs crisp with animals whose names anyone can guess, even when the words are gone. The ring lies half buried, not by neglect, but by a kind of conclusion. Someone covered it on purpose, as if to save it for a later appetite, or to keep its instruction from being worn thin by too much weather. The pillars stand like adults, with their hands folded, faces not carved, because the posture is already a face. You feel a lurch in the tidy march of invention. Nobody told these stones to wait for pottery, for script, for the rest of the syllabus. They arrived early and took attendance anyway. Further north and west, another ring faces Seawind. The horizon speaks in slow vowels. The stones answer by simply being upright in the gale. Islands teach you how to count by weather. You can hear the ocean inside the circle, even when it is quiet, a low consonant under the vowels of light. Nobody tilts a stone here without asking the wind first. Fly over a desert, and lines write themselves in a script designed for birds. A spider bigger than any hand. A trapezoid that refuses to end at its edges. A long arrow that points not to a destination, but to a habit of sky. From the ground, they are sober scratches. From height, they become grammar. You suspect a conversation between earthen watchers that required altitude. Whether from a hill, a tower, a dream, the place lays out an argument for patience. You can walk a line for hours and see nothing. Then from above, the whole sentence makes sense at once. In a different stone, a different lesson. Blocks the size of small houses sit in a wall, like words only giants say. The fit is better than the quarryman had any right to expect if the tools were what we think they were. A crane can be reverent or boastful depending on the voice of its operator. Either way, the stones are not impressed. They are content. They have been made to agree, and agreement suits them. Underground, again, a chamber remembers red. Spirals and dots drawn in ochre on stone curve around to meet sound. If you speak a low note here, the walls answer the way the granite answered you elsewhere. The frequency is fussy. The effect is not. Men led strangers into this dark to learn instructions that did not need to be spoken. How to listen. How to put your breath among others and make something that wasn't there before and will linger as if it were always meant to live in this particular room. A stair that was once a skull's shelf teaches you not to use names too quickly. There are more. Doorways that take stars as seriously as guests. Windows that only admit Venus when Venus wants to be admitted. Platforms that lay out triangles so large you can only feel them with your legs. Cairns that treat the horizon like a dial and the clouds like fingers turning it. None of them are simple. They pretend to be stones in time, light in angle. But then they ask you a second question, and a third, and the questions are older than your calendar. A pattern gathers without becoming a trap. Circles love thresholds, thresholds love sky, sky loves return, return loves instruction. Water is remembered even where it has left the surface for the lower rooms. Sound is invited to be more than decoration. It becomes a method for access. The ethics are the same in every latitude. Align to something that does not need you. Let the measurement be embodied rather than inscribed. Hide nothing from the weather except the piece that cannot survive weathering. Each site refuses the easy story. None of them wants to be mysterious in the way brochures mean it. They want you to do what you did at Giza. Stand. Look where the stone looks. Test the air with your hum. Check the angle with your rib cage. Submit your hurry to a longer arithmetic. If the dates tangle the neat line of human self-congratulation, the stones are correct, and the line needs untangling. If some of them arrive too early, the problem is not theirs. It's the word early, which imagines a queue where there may have been a field. You drift back the way you came, thread in hand. The plateau is where you left it and not. You have carried other thresholds across an ocean of air and laid them gently beside the lion that keeps its gaze. Nothing collapses under the new company. The circle in the chalk plain, the rain stones in the dead lake bed, the sunk terraces, the star-wise pillars, the lines only birds can read. They all sit quietly like elders at the edge of a courtyard, not speaking unless asked, content to share shade and purpose. Their echo is not noise, it is chorus. You stand again where the sun breaks the horizon. The Sphinx continues the lesson you've heard elsewhere. Keep a true relation. Hold your measure. Let the numbers live in what you build so they don't have to live in your mouth. Across the world, other stones nod. It is not consent you hear. It is recognition. The thresholds have been speaking to one another across distances you thought only ships could cross. Nothing about that is simple. Everything about it is clear. You picture shelves, then let them go. You picture papyrus, then release that too. The room you enter has no bindings, no spines to tilt and read. It is a library built from relations, an archive whose catalog numbers are angles and whose security system is the sky. There are no librarians, but there is order. There are no pages, but there are leaves. Planes of stone turn toward events that happen whether or not anyone bothers to watch. Here, knowledge is kept not in marks that can blur, but in ratios that refuse to die when languages do. Begin with a simple thought, a square set level on the earth. No ink is required to teach what a true corner feels like. Lay a second square atop it, not resting, but rising, and now the slope between them is a sentence. The proportion between height and half-base is a clause that does not age. Even if you never carve a character, the triangle remembers. Wind can soften edges, and men can quarrel over meanings. The ratio will be itself. It is the kind of memory stone keeps better than paper, a memory of behavior. In such a library, the catalog is redundancy. One relation is stored in many forms. The base perimeter to the height says circle without drawing one. The face angle says harmony without a single note on a staff. The gaze says east at equal light without the frailty of a calendar's ink. If you lose one expression, cladding stolen, casing battered, the others remain as backups. A well-built monument palms copies of itself throughout its choices. Proportion is both content and checksum. Shelves here are horizons. You find the equinox compartment by standing where the dawn will always be fair. You find the solstice annex by watching the year lean and right its long shadows. The star room opens at night, when Orion steps to his old marks and the passage of centuries teaches him to be a few finger widths wrong, and the stone records that drift without complaint. Procession turns in the long halls like a quiet cart on oiled wheels. A reader who returns often will feel the shift and know. Time is not a line with a slogan. It is a wheel with a wobble that can be measured. Below, in the cool stacks of the labyrinth, geometry is shelved as void. Rooms are set to soft acoustics or hard. Ceilings step to carry fury away from a span. Pools hold stillness to show vault and beam their mirrored opposites. No titles are lettered over the doorways. Function, names itself by doing the same job for a scandalous number of centuries. The empty box offers its dimensions as thesis. This shape withstands. This spacing persuades weight to be reasonable. You place your palm on a pier and feel an old annotation, a trace of load migrating, solved long ago not by argument but by arrangement. Every durable library has a reference desk. Here, the reference is the sky, which cannot be bribed to agree. Align a face to true north, and the cosmos edits your work daily with light. Aim a shaft where a particular star once lived, and the error accumulates at a pace that can be learned and forecast. The design corrects itself by obliging future readers to notice discrepancy. No priest must whisper, "Look." The sunlight does the pointing and the walls keep minutes in shadow. You could lose the priests and keep the knowledge. That is the point. You entertain, for a respectful moment, the old whisper about a hall of records buried like a seed under the paws. Perhaps a chamber waits with inscriptions intact, 1,000 reeds of ink sleeping like winter bees. Perhaps not. The library you are already standing in makes the debate feel smaller than the room. If a vault of texts exists, it would be a fine appendix. The main body is outside and open, legible to anyone with patience, a cord, and a willingness to start at dawn. If secrecy guarded anything here, it guarded time, not content. The ratios have never been hidden. We merely forget how to read aloud. Consider how lessons are encoded as chores. Sweep the threshold, and you will notice when the light reaches it sooner or later than it should. Carry water down a shaft, and you will discover which steps sweat, and on what days the sweating begins. Lay your back into a block, and you will learn what slope will permit you to survive the day. The library's pedagogy is stubbornly practical. You cannot access the text without performing the task that proves you deserve it. Page turning is replaced by maintenance. Literacy becomes upkeep. What of authorship? In a paper library, spines shout names. In this one, anonymity is the discipline that keeps the text uncorrupted. If a king's boast lived on every course, the structure would be forced to serve a vanity schedule. By declining to sign, the builders protected the message from the author. The sky would have laughed at a signature anyway, and kept shining crooked on a crooked wall. The only name worth carving here was True, and the light carves it every equinox for free. You think of redundancy in wider geography, and feel the shelves extend across oceans. A ring of stones under a northern sky keeps the same kind of time as a shaft in a desert, both entries in a shared catalog of cycles. Terraces cut like bowls into high mountains store the method of making temperature a tool. Spirals in underground rock sing the same note your hum woke in granite. Across the world, the library without pages mirrors itself, making sure that if one wing burns, and wings do burn, another holds the prototypes of proportion. The planet itself is the architect's RAID array. Compression matters too. Words expand, relations compress. A library of parchment needs rooms and climate and guards. A ratio hides in a corner and travels as light. Perimeter to height speak circle, is stored in a single angle at the base, in a single measure of slope, in a single shadow that behaves. The data density would impress any mathematician and comfort any farmer. You do not need to own the book. You need only to be present when the sun turns a page. There is even an index, if you know how to run your finger along it. It is the list of ifs a reader must meet. If the base is level, then true returns. If the gaze is due east, then equals meet. If the beam spacing lives within these tolerances, then weight will behave. If the chamber's ratio is this to that, then sound will be kind. The index is not bound at the end. It is bound into the work. The cross-references are weather. The footnotes are seasons. The temptation is to romanticize, to make a myth of a vault of golden tablets under paw or pylon. But the older, braver myth is plainer, that a civilization trusted relation more than rhetoric, and built its curriculum in stone aligned to obligations no dynasty could control. That curriculum is what survived, not because it was guarded by secrecy, but because it refused to need secrecy. It asked to be used, not believed. It still does. You leave the stacks by doing what readers everywhere do at closing. You put the book back where you found it. In this library, that means restoring your small order to the place you borrowed it from. You brush grit from a joint, straighten a cord, memorize the way a shadow falls, so you can check it next time, without announcing that you're checking. You step into daylight, carrying nothing that can fall from your hands. The ratios have moved into your gate. Behind you, the stones go on keeping their hours. No curators pacing with keys, no alarm set to scold. The sun does the unlocking at the same time today as it will on another equal day centuries away. Night does the shelving with a gentleness that would shame any archivist. And in the morning the library without pages opens again, as it has always opened, with a line of light along a brow, a triangle of shadow that knows its own mathematics, and a patient gaze that reads the horizon into meaning. You start to notice the small ways forgetting works, how it never arrives with trumpets, how it prefers soft shoes, a shutter padlocked, a sign that says, "Closed for conservation," in a font designed to keep your pulse low, a rope that turns a path into a picture. No booming decrees, just arrangements. The story stays tidy because everything that would muss it is escorted into a quiet corner and asked to wait. In a museum, a label does as much work as a wall. One paragraph of calm certainty makes a decade of argument vanish. The verbs are all past tense and well-behaved. Attributed, dated, associated. You feel the gentlest hand on your elbow steering you away from the difficult cases. The room smells of varnish and approvals. In a glass case, a stone with a long voice sits with its back to you, its damaged face translated as a summary of what it does not say. A red dot on the floor tells you where to stand. Standing anywhere else is disruptive. Outside, the plateau practices its own pedagogy. It does not erase, it softens. Sand tells the wind where to lay down, and the wind writes the same sentence over and over until every sharpness is grammatically correct. You stoop and pinch a little drift between finger and thumb, and learn that dust can be an argument. It gathers where neglect has been longer than memory. It recoils from handles used last season. It refuses to settle on a threshold still in service. A broom is a kind of editor, deciding which traces are typos and which are text. The arc the bristles leave is a marginal note. This was tidied, not studied. You recall the sealed door deep in the vent, copper pins like polite punctuation, stone practicing not yet with perfect posture. Everyone loves a dramatic barrier because it lets refusal be visible. But most refusals are less photogenic. A permit delayed until the season closes. A trench backfilled for safety before anyone measures the silence it contained. A report filed in a journal with a circulation smaller than a village. Forthcoming. A word that can last years. The quiet hand of forgetting prefers bureaucracy to bulldozers. It knows that paper, properly stacked, weighs more than stone. There's a narrative economy at work, too. Tours run on schedules. Syllabi run on semesters. Documentaries run on arcs that feel like steps. Anything that would ask the audience to sit through a pause. The kind of pause a double door makes, the kind of pause a humming chamber requires, gets trimmed. A tidy story has a strong heart rate and no rumination. You feel this in your own body when you try to explain what you've seen, how quickly your mouth reaches for the sentence that will deliver a landing instead of a question. Forgetting is helped along by our impatience with our own wonder. You become sensitive to what is sidelined, a stela in a stairwell between floors, a photograph pinned near the fire extinguisher, a footnote that handles a bomb with oven mitts, later tradition records. Tradition, later, records. A stack of words used as a soft blanket over something still warm. You read the footnote again and sense the absent sound. A debate that once had breath and heat, now filed to a whisper. The tidy story glides forward, grateful not to have tripped. Dust continues its steady testimony. In the lower city, where water had kept a room honest, a pale collar on the wall marks years of overflow. Up in the sun, a bright, clean stripe at ankle height along a rope's course tells you how many days 1,000 sandals walked to the line and bowed to cotton. Forgetting is not only the removal of evidence, it is also the installation of rituals that keep you from seeing it. Please do not cross, says the sign, and the sign is right. Fragility deserves respect, but the line also freezes curiosity into the dimensions of a corridor. You think of translation as another soft glove, how an inscription becomes a paragraph in a language that did not exist when the chisel bit. Tone is lost, irony flattened, reverence merged with routine. A cautious scholar inserts, perhaps, likely, it seems, and the typesetter removes them to make room for an image. Scholars are not villains in this. They are citizens of a crowded page. But trimming becomes habit. Habit becomes doctrine. Doctrine becomes the furniture in rooms where the air no longer turns. Funding is a quiet hand, too. Grants favor questions that yield answers in the span of a fiscal year. What is it? Beats. What if? Concrete yields a ribbon cutting. Ambiguity yields an itinerary. You feel the way money itself gravitates to the broom and away from the ledger in the dark that would take 2 winters just to read with dignity. A curator you like shrugs and quotes the cost of patience. You don't blame them. You start to count the number of ways a civilization can be poor, even while selling tickets. Sometimes forgetting is an accident, merciful and unblameable. A wall falls in a storm, a map is misfiled, a fire takes a shelf in a room no one had checked for wiring in a generation. Whole practices vanish not because anyone planned it, but because a village emptied one year, and nobody's grandson loved the work enough to stay. You stand between blame and weather, and understand that the line between the two is as thin as that drill hole through the first slab, the hole you watched an eye pass through and find not treasure, but time. But there is design as well, selection elevated into policy. What does not fit the story a nation tells about itself is cataloged under curiosities, a drawer that rarely gets pulled. The gallery notes point to pyramids as proof of a central narrative of genius and labor, and what lies beneath is described as ancillary, or ritual, words that keep the lower city out of the main room. A journalist asks a question, and is escorted gently to an exhibit where the answers are laminated. The press kit contains a horizon. Everything beyond it is weather. You test your own memory. How often have you repeated the line that pleased whoever first told it to you because it pleased you, and that was enough? How often have you cleaned your story the way a broom cleans a threshold? You admit that tidy isn't only a property of institutions. It is the home habit of a mind that likes to feel finished at bedtime. To resist forgetting, then, is to adopt a practice, not a pose. You begin to keep a different kind of list, not answers, but dissonances. A note about a shadow that came too soon. A name missing, where a name would be normal. A door that refused and made you grateful. In such a ledger, dust becomes an ally. It settles according to use, and use is evidence. You start to read the floor as closely as a scroll, where feet stop, where they never do, where the keeper's sweep has to fight an updraft you did not know existed. A cobweb unbroken at the mouth of a vent says more than a brochure. A fingerprint in the back of a niche, too high for a child, too faint for a performance, is a whisper that someone once asked the wall a question no one else thought to ask. You listen for dismissal. Sometimes it comes wrapped in courtesy, interesting, but fringe, as if the margin were a naughty seat at the classroom's edge. Sometimes it comes wrapped in care. We must protect the site, and you agree, and also feel in that protection a preference for inertia over inquiry. A sealed room is easy to guard. A question that wanders out into the open picks things up, scratches paint, makes friends with strangers, and could embarrass a plaque. Better to keep the ribbon uncut and the photo opportunity unruffled. And yet, forgetting can never be total where ratios live. The equinox does not take construction. The slope continues to make the sun fall at a particular speed. A humming chamber keeps its note for anyone with a breath and the courage to hold it. You think of this as a counter-archive, watermarks and angles and echoes that won't go down the stairs the tidy story has built for them. They remain upstairs at the table, not eating until everyone else is seated. You walk the plateau in the late light and watch tidiness do its last small chore of the day, shadows putting their tools away. In that lull, the anomalies stand out the way stars appear, while the sky is still busy with its blue. A line too true to be casual. A stone too old to be an accessory. A rumor kept alive by how many ways it fails to die. The quiet hand of forgetting is diligent. So is the slow hand of attention. You cannot stop the one. You can choose to practice the other. As dusk completes itself, you brush grit from a joint and leave it on your palm long enough to memorize its weight. You have not solved anything. You have refused to let any single solution take all the chairs. That is work. In the dark, the sealed doors remain sealed. The sidelined artifacts keep their small dignity, and the dismissed footnotes breathe like animals asleep. Dust continues the argument of where it prefers to lie. The tidy story settles itself for the night, trimmed and brushed, ready for tomorrow's visitors. You lie down too, convinced not of answers but of the worth of noticing. Forgetting may move with soft shoes. You can learn to move quieter. You let the idea open like a flower that only night can coax. Slow petals, no rush, a patient fragrance of consequence. If the Sphinx is 10 millennia older, then the story we carry in our pockets is not a line, but a rope, frayed and spliced, pulled taut across gaps no syllabus ever admitted. Age is not decoration, it is jurisdiction. An extra 10,000 years makes the lion's head a magistrate of time, and we become what the patient always suspected we were. Caretakers, not authors. Caretaker shifts the angle of everything. A builder may boast, a keeper tends, a builder finishes. A keeper checks the joints at dawn, listens to the stone at dusk, sweeps the threshold in ways that make weather an ally and not an adversary. If the Sphinx predated pharaohs by ages of water and wind, then the first kings arrived, as we would arrive at a lighthouse after a storm, wet, grateful, and ready to relight a lamp someone else designed to outlast our names. Restoration becomes the real royal act. The crown becomes a broom. You feel the humility of that trade settle across centuries like cool sand. Timelines loosen under the weight of the word older. The chart you learned in a bright classroom, neat boxes, arrows pointing forward as if history were a well-behaved parade, unspools and curls like rope in a boat bottom, rise, fall, recovery, invention as recollection, agriculture beginning, stalling, beginning again, stone circles waking in chalk fields, then sleeping, then waking, undersea terraces, looking up from a drowned memory. The Sphinx, if it is that ancient, becomes another flare from an earlier shoreline, a signal that an organized mind once stood where desert now rehearses emptiness. You don't need a map to feel the pattern, you need a patience for spirals. An artifact that survives cataclysm preaches resilience by being present. 10,000 extra years means the lion-watched lakes turn to pasture, pasture to dust, dust to nation, nation to legend. Its face wore rain, and then stars, and then tourists, and then scaffolds. Through each costume change, the gaze stayed where dawn happens. If survival is curriculum, orientation is the first lesson. Choose a constant and keep your attention there, so that when everything else moves, you are not lost. Civilizations that forget this end up memorizing their exits. Creation moves next door to curation, and curation acquires its full dignity. The word has been cheapened by galleries. Here it regains its older force. To curate is to cure, to care for against rot and error. Imagine the Old Kingdom as a hospital for a patient monument. Sand cleared, flanks patched, a cult renewed, not for vanity, but for function. Imagine the dream of a prince as a maintenance request, written in the language of gods, because only that language could command the labor required. Imagine later dynasties as custodians under different regimes of budget and myth, all of them agreeing about the only fact that mattered. This being must keep seeing east. Your sense of knowledge changes. Instead of a triumphant march from ignorance to light, you feel a civilization packing things for a journey it suspects will be rough. Ratios that will not spoil, alignments that cannot rust, chambers that can hum a low note when language has forgotten how to make sense. The Sphinx as we find it, eroded, repaired, reinterpreted, reads less like a monument and more like a cache, not treasure, provisions, water skins of geometry, bundles of direction, flint for making mornings. If the Sphinx is that old, then myth stops being only entertainment and starts being the long shadow cast by remembering over a ravine of forgetting. Flood stories learn new gravity. Atlantis shrugs on a different coat, not correctness, but utility. A myth that kept curiosity alive while charts slept did useful work. You grant it that without having to marry it. The point is not to crown an island. The point is to learn how survivors talk to descendants. In images tough enough to survive ridicule, in structures tough enough to survive weather. You watch professional certainties flex. Disciplines used to owning their boxes loosen their collars. Geology walks down the hall to speak softly with epigraphy. Architecture brings coffee to astronomy. Anthropology admits the size of its unknowns and stays anyway. The Sphinx, older, would force a conference across specialties that have grown comfortable with their separate clipboards. The best work always happens in corridors. A 10 millennia lion also revises scale. We are impressed by centuries. Stone is unimpressed. You feel the difference in your bones. Your plans shorten until they are defensible. How to keep the drainage honest this season. How to convince a budget to love maintenance. How to keep the sand from writing its grammar where joints need to speak. Long ambitions, yes. But Serviced by the dailiness of cloth on stone, hands on handles, the simple rule that nothing future-facing proceeds until the present is kept from crumbling underfoot. The older the Sphinx becomes, the more chores matter. Humans change under that gaze. Pride blinks less and looks more. Our species loves to narrate itself as the protagonist. An elder monument makes a better request. Be a good steward in a long ensemble. The music will not pause for your solo. Learn your entrance by the sky. Take your bow by the shadow. Leave the score legible for whoever picks up your measure after the silence that will, inevitably, own you. Curricula change too if we let them. Children would be taught to read light as fluently as text. Field trips would take place at dawn with notebooks blank, except for a single instruction. Mark where the first bright line lands and where it lands tomorrow, and consider why it changed. Museums would have galleries dedicated to unanswered questions, funded, as well as the rooms whose plaques are finished. Exams would ask for care plans. Degrees would certify competence in patience. Designers would point their practice toward time. Houses would orient for forgiveness. Cross-ventilation, shade that obeys the sun. Roofs that invite water to stay and teach instead of flee and ruin. Bridges would expect floods. Libraries would back up in stone what they keep in circuits. Cities would admit that a street aligned to something permanent is an easier street to remember when maps burn. The Sphinx, older, teaches planning that expects interruption and builds for return. Ethics sharpen. If we are heirs, we owe our inheritance a status beyond interest and spectacle. Tourism without apprenticeship becomes theft disguised as admiration. Scholarship without maintenance becomes gossip. The older the Sphinx, the clearer the contract. Visit as a trainee, not a consumer. Leave a joint cleaner than you found it. Contribute to the ledger of shadow links. Tread the rope line as if it were a sentence in a fragile book. Consider whether your camera has earned its shutter. Even politics must move a little. Borders are temporary. Orientations are not. If the monument predates the flags that now wave near it by ages of weather, then it belongs to a commons measured in breath and dawn. This does not erase stewardship, it deepens it. Nations become librarians of rooms whose readers come from elsewhere carrying questions that belong to everyone. You can feel how radical that is, and how ordinary it could be if practiced daily. And then there is comfort, the kind we rarely expect from stone. A world that seems always to be ending learns that endings are also edits. Civilizations forget, and then they remember. And the remembering is never precise, but it is sufficient. The Sphinx, as Elder says, someone before you took the trouble to put a pointer in the ground and pointed at time. If you lose your way, arrive here early. Stand where the eyes stand. Watch the horizon open, and let the next measure begin. After collapse, a morning. After a lost library, a ratio still true. After arrogance, errands. You let the implication finish blooming. 10,000 years added to a face adds nothing to its expression, and everything to its jurisdiction. You do not need a proclamation. You have a practice. Keep, align, tend, teach, return. The lion breathes its quiet, and you breathe with it, the way you hum, with granite, until the note in the room and the note in your chest learn one another. If the Sphinx is 10 millennia older, then the past is not behind you. It is beneath your feet, under every step, waiting for you to inherit your chore list and your dawn. You return to the present the way a tide returns, quietly, having carried whole coastlines and put them back so gently the shells don't notice. The plateau is itself again, a slope of dust disciplined by dawn, limestone cooling after night, the murmur of a city waking somewhere beyond the ridge like a soft rehearsal. You have traveled in thought and sound and ratio, but your feet are here, among the same small pebbles that refused to be anything other than themselves yesterday. And there he is, the watcher at the lip of light, neither moved nor unmoved, a patience carved into posture. The Sphinx waits, saying nothing, telling everything. You stand where your shadow hardly belongs to you yet, its outline more suggestion than decision, and feel the old geometry taking attendance. East clarifies into a single, necessary line. The lion's face accepts first brightness without surprise, as if greeting a colleague who keeps impeccable hours. The air is cool enough to teach politeness. A few early starlings argue briefly about nothing, and then adopt the morning's order. The world has a heartbeat again, and the temple stones feel it first. Silence here is not absence, it is arrangement. You can hear the soft arithmetic of brooms somewhere behind you, a keeper's patience measured in strokes. A guide clears his throat, the way one tunes a room without instruments. A truck coughs and thinks better of it. Even these are welcome, proof that the living are learning to be gradual. The Sphinx keeps the rule that has made him elder. Do not interrupt the horizon, let it come to you, and do not blink when it does. You notice how the night's small work remains. Dew has darkened the dust in thin crescents at the base of blocked steps. A spider's thread ties one stone to another with a line so true it could be used as a plumb if anyone wished to consult it. The copper taste of cool air sits on your tongue like a note waiting its cue. You think of the chamber that hums and feel under the sternum, an echo you are not making, some remnant resonance that refuses to declare itself conscious or memory. The body keeps its own field notes. A guard waves you forward 3 paces and then palm stops you with a courtesy that reads as liturgy. The rope line bows across the forecourt like a sentence drawn out to make room for a breath. You respect it not because authority asked you to, but because the morning has explained the difference between trespass and attendance. There are doors that refuse below. There are lines that teach refusal above. Together they hold the place in the shape of a question that knows when to be answered and when to be kept. You remember your ledger of thresholds and the way dust can be an argument. This morning the argument is mild, and its conclusion simple. Someone swept. Someone chose care over speed. The broken corner you noted last time has been left broken, not out of neglect, but because mending would have made a lie of history in a spot where truth belongs. Decisions like this are the quiet grammar of stewardship. The Sphinx, older than any of us, supervises without moving. First light finds the brow, then the nose, then the plane beneath the eyes, and each illumination feels less like a reveal than a reminder. Of course the face was made to meet this hour. Of course the gaze was taught to expect symmetry, and then endure the slight imbalances that accrual brings. You think of procession, of stars drifting in slow, polite disagreement with their former selves, and you feel the daily version of that drift in the way brightness walks the Sphinx, a little earlier or later by heartbeats you can't count but can trust. You bring your breath low and let a small hum happen in the back of your throat, barely audible to anyone but yourself. You are not in granite now, not in that tuned box, yet the hum answers itself in the bones as if the plateau had an ear you cannot see. The sound falters, then steadies. It is an apology and a salute both. If the Sphinx hears, he does what he always does. refuses to perform his hearing, the lesson remains yours. What has changed, for you, not for him, is the angle of responsibility. You are no longer a tourist who has been impressed. You are a reader who has borrowed a book without pages and intends to return it with the corners unbent. The chores come to mind unbidden, the patient measuring of shadow lengths, the small registry of hairline cracks, the moral insistence on sweeping as study rather than erasure. The watcher at dawn has made caretakers of strangers for longer than any record admits. Today he makes one of you, a bus door size. The day's first group steps down into the cool and does what groups always do: whispers, lifts phones, takes small steps that pretend not to be hurried. You feel no irritation. The library needs readers of every language. You listen for the tone of their questions. Some are the old favorites. How old? How heavy? How long? Some are better. Why this line? Why that angle? Why silence here where others shout? You offer one answer to none and all. Stay until the light finishes its first sentence. Then decide what to ask next. The present, properly attended, is as full as the past. A kestrel draws a short figure 8 in the good air above the temple's roofline. A cat considers sunning itself on a warm ledge and abandons the plan because the ledge is not yet warm enough to be a promise. A boy, son of a guard or vendor, maps the distance between two posts with the precise boredom of patience, teaching his feet a ratio he does not know he will remember. The Sphinx sees all of this, and none of it alters him. And yet, each small act becomes part of the morning's record, the living laid alongside the enduring, each keeping the other honest. You glance back to the ridge where the city is shaking off its dreams. The first bread is being carried. The first kettle is admitting its usefulness. The first quarrel has been abandoned, because quarrels do not like to be seen in this light. You feel a ridiculous tenderness for such ordinary things. The question in your hands has not shrunk them. It has dignified them. Dawn here is not a spectacle. It is a contract. Between stone and star, yes, but also between task and meaning. A cloud attempts a performance and fails, dissolving into the kind of thin that only gives the sun a softer instrument. The color across the lion's cheekbone is the color of decision. You understand why phrases like eternal grow careless in mouths that haven't done this exercise. The better word is reliable. Eternity is a rumor. Reliability is a skill. The Sphinx practices reliability for a living. You could too. It is time to go and you do not want to. Wanting is not consulted. The day is opening its other rooms. Somewhere, a ledger needs a line. Somewhere, a gate needs oil. Somewhere, a child deserves to be shown how to notice where the horizon begins and what it means to face it with the neck still. You take one more look, which is really an agreement to take 1,000 more later in other places where other thresholds ask the same courtesy. The Sphinx does not bless you. He does not withhold blessing. He keeps his work. It is enough. The question you have been carrying warms your palms like a cup. If the lion is elder by 10,000 years, if tunnels fold under the plateau like thoughts under speech, if ratios keep the curriculum open when words sleep, what does your morning owe? You do not answer. You accept the usefulness of not answering yet. You turn away with your steps, softened by the hour. The watcher at dawn remains where he must, seeing what he has always seen. On your way down, a small breeze lifts a ribbon of dust and lays it back as gently as a librarian closing a book. You let your breath match that motion. Sleep will come later, and with it the chance to let the question steep. For now, the present is generous and exact. The Sphinx waits, saying nothing, telling everything, inviting you to carry the warmth into your day, and then into your night, and then into the quieter rooms where dreams do their inventory of what we learned and what we failed to. When your eyes close, the horizon will be there behind them, a thin gold line that never belonged to one era, one king, one story. It will belong, as it does now, to the simple courage of facing east. When the night folds shut, let the Sphinx keep watch for you. The question can stay warm in your hands until morning. If the sand has shifted something in you, carry that quiet into your day and meet the horizon with steadier eyes. Thank you for listening. Sleep well. The stones will still be speaking when you wake.